Hi, this is Brian Shea, host of the All Things Nintendo podcast and former director at Game Informer, and you are listening to the SEGA Lounge.
Welcome to the SEGA Lounge, where we celebrate our love for all things SEGA, including the games, the music, and the community. I'm your host, KC. Join me as I talk to different guests and learn more about their projects and passion for SEGA. Hello everyone, welcome to the SEGA Lounge. It's a really special episode this week, episode 229, and I'm here joined by a very special guest. I think I've been hyping up this special guest for a while, talking about a future Nintendo themed show, and I wasn't hyping up this man. He really is a special guest. It's not just hype. It's beyond the hype. So Brian Shea, welcome to the SEGA Lounge.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I mean, Sega themed podcast is right up my alley, even though I host a Nintendo podcast.
Yeah, and so you are people listen to the cold open. You're the host of the All Things Nintendo podcast, which I recently discovered. I know it's been going on for a while. Formerly as part of Game Informer, right? But you recently actually went indie, so to speak, in more ways than one, but in terms of the podcast. But I really enjoy your podcast, and I was actually looking for someone to collab with, to have on the show that hosted a Nintendo podcast that I enjoyed listening to, and was I feel like listening to the last, like, I don't know, maybe 10, 20 episodes of the show. I feel like I can I don't know, I can connect with your style of hosting and your conversational style of hosting the podcast. I really enjoy it. So that's why I wanted to have you here. Yeah, and you were gracious enough to say yes, to agree to come on the show even before the news about Game Informer went out to the public. I don't want to linger too much on this because I know it's probably you're probably sick of talking about this. But would you like to tell us a little bit about what your role was at Game Informer and how that happened? How do you happen to get involved with the publication as well?
Sure. So, I grew up reading Game Informer like so many people did. It was like that, Game Pro, Electronic Gaming Monthly, Nintendo Power. Those were all like the magazines that I sought out as a kid and either had subscriptions to, or I would constantly go to my school library or my public library and get the latest issue out and just like, read it from cover to cover to learn all about like the biggest upcoming games that were on the horizon. And as a kid, I kind of wanted to be a sports reporter because I discovered that, oh, writing isn't torture if it's about something that you love. So, when I wrote for my school paper when I was in elementary school and I was covering like, all the different sports that were going on, I was just obsessed with like baseball in particular, but also basketball and football to a lesser extent back then. But then in fourth grade, I wrote a biography about I get to write one about somebody I know and like that's like in my family, I think was like the prompt. And then another one was a biography about a celebrity or somebody that you like really respect. And so I wrote it about my grandfather, and then I wrote a biography about Cal Ripken Jr., the then shortstop of the Baltimore Orioles baseball team. And I was like, oh, that was like super fun to do. Like I really enjoyed it. And I liked giving the presentation about it and everything. So I kind of put that in my back pocket as like the dream of like being a sports reporter kind of faded. And then like went to school and switched my major when I was at university, switched my major over to something that was much more writing based. I went originally to computer science. And after
Okay.
spending the first semester every single Saturday, spending 8 to 10 hours in the computer lab trying to bang my head up against to do a basic programming task, I was like, this isn't for me. Very clearly, I'm not enjoying it. I'm not enjoying my college life, and I'm not naturally gifted in this field. So I switched to something much more essay based and argumentation based or argumentative based. So graduated with that, but I was also an RA in college, which may be public enemy number one, but also it gave me a lot of downtime in office hours that I needed to have. So in that time, I co-founded a music website with a friend, and it started off just kind of like internet forums. And this is where I really start to date myself, by the way, in terms of like how long I've been at this. So originally it was internet message board. And I was like, you know what, I think we could do more with this. And I was like really getting the itch to like pursue grander ambitions with this website that I started, this rock music website. So I started using MySpace to reach out to bands that I really liked and doing interviews with these artists, connecting with them through MySpace, then doing interviews, and then writing that up as like kind of like I was the admin of the site, so I could do like pinned topics on the message boards. And then slowly that turned into like, okay, well, I'm gonna do album reviews. And then uh thing that will date me, number three, message boards, MySpace, and then in 2008, Circuit City was going out of business, and there was one in my college town, so I went over there and saw what they had, and they had the Fallout 3 collector's edition on closeout because they had everything must go. And I picked it up because I heard like, oh, I read in Game Informer that this game is absolutely amazing. I'm gonna buy the collector's edition. It was like something like $35 or something like that. So my broke
Nice.
college self could afford it. And I took it home, played it obsessively, and I was like, you know what? I've been writing album reviews and doing interviews with musicians. I want to write a video game review. I've loved video games my whole life. Let me go ahead and write this review of Fallout 3. And so I did that, and I really enjoyed it. So I think my next ones were like maybe Assassin's Creed or something like that. I just carried it on with other games that I was just playing for fun. I would get games on GameFly, the mail rental service that you could do, and I would just play them from start to finish and then write reviews about them. And then that transitioned into, this is around the time of like Guitar Hero and Rock Band being at their peak. So I went ahead and actually pitched one of these like content farm type sites on bringing me on as a writer for the topic of music video games. And so
Okay.
they actually agreed to it because Guitar Hero and Rock Band were enormous back
Yeah.
then, putting
Yeah.
out like multiple games a year and everything. So I had already been writing a little bit for them, covering local concerts for the Pittsburgh edition, which is where I was living at the time. And they were like, "Yeah, sure, come on, write some music video game stuff for us." So I kind of parlayed my expertise in music and also my expertise because at the time I was actually playing Guitar Hero competitively. So I parlayed that into writing about music video games, and then I took that, uh, started writing for a very small. At the time, it was an Xbox focused website, but then it expanded to be multi-platform. Then around 2010, I co-founded my own site with another friend. It was a video game focused site, and it actually took a lot of inspiration from Game Informer. So
Mhm.
it was kind of in that same vein. And then, around 2012, 2013, I started writing freelance for various outlets like IGN, Kotaku, official Xbox magazine, Joystick. And after I got some of those bylines in, I applied to work for Game Informer for a fourth time. And I had been rejected three times prior, but this time I had gone to E3 2014 and I had met several of the members of leadership. And now that they had put like a face to the name of this guy who keeps applying fruitlessly to work for them, I think that maybe that did the trick, or maybe it was just a complete stroke of luck that my resume stuck out to them this time. But I had also
Mhm.
built up my byline quite a bit by then. And I joined January 2015, so I was coming up on a decade, which it kind of bums me out that I didn't reach that 10-year mark
Yeah.
officially
Mhm.
before Game Informer was closed. But I started off as associate editor, and then I was quickly promoted to digital editor, which oversaw the digital magazine and also was a member of the kind of the department leadership team. And then after a few years of that, I was promoted to senior editor, and then eventually online content director, meaning I oversaw the website and the day to day operations of GameInformer.com.
Mhm.
And in 2021, as you had mentioned, I started this podcast called All Things Nintendo, initially under the Game Informer umbrella. Unfortunately, earlier this year, when we lost one of our editors to a layoff, I was like, oh, I either have to stop this podcast or I have to do it in my free time because I just don't have the bandwidth to do it during work hours anymore because I just pick up extra responsibilities when the editor was laid off. So I took it independent. I started a free Patreon page, and then when Game Informer was closed earlier this month, I decided to really expand on that. You know, opening up paid Patreon tiers, opening like starting a whole second podcast focused on multi-platform games called All Things Gamers. That's
Yeah.
the $10 perk, so people who are paying patrons get exclusive access to that. And then yeah, it's just been incredibly amazing to have the support of this incredible community. I've been so grateful that they've been there and they've really helped me through kind of these what could have been very dark times in terms of
Yeah.
like, you know, my career and, you know, just mental health and everything with losing the dream job that I've been working for the last 10 years. So I'm eternally grateful. So shout out to the patrons of the All Things Nintendo podcast. They're salt of the earth human beings.
And they have some of the best names as well. You read the names at the end of each episode. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that. So shout out to them for sure.
Yeah, they sometimes I'm like, okay, I'm gonna read this name. But
No,
yes, there are
and
some very good
I
people.
like how you actually read them with a straight face and like very serious at the end of each episode. That's great.
Yeah, it's interesting to. I think after a certain number of times of reading it, you know, saying "Wham Bam Sam the Gaming Man"
Yeah,
with a
that's one
straight
of the
face
best.
gets easier.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I'm from Portugal, so I didn't really understand the impact, the scope even of Game Informer in the US. And ever since I actually started listening to your podcast, I that started to dawn on me. And this unfortunate news of GameStop closing down Game Informer really made it like everyone online was like sharing memories, sharing their thoughts about this uh, highly regarded publication, this highly influential publication being done for it. It's really sad that such a long run, which is
Mhm.
not really as common as you'd think in these days, was over. But why do you think this was your dream job? Why Game Informer specifically, Brian? Because you've mentioned other publications you wrote for. What was it about Game Informer that was so important to you before you joined and even during your tenure there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to really say a lot of the stuff that made Game Informer so special until I was actually a part of the team. But you know, it was just one of those publications from an outsider's perspective that I grew up reading. I really respected the work that they were doing. You know, the issue 200 was one of my favorite issues they ever did prior to me joining. And it, basically, what they did was every 100 issues, they would take that number and then they would do that number, the greatest games of all time. So the issue 100 was the 100 greatest games of all time. Issue 200 was the 200 greatest games of all time. And I was able to be a part of issue 300. So we did the 300 greatest games of all time, which was a massive undertaking. So like stuff like that, I always loved. And then like I think it was 2007 or so, they transitioned to this new cover story format where they would get rid of most of the text on the cover of the magazine itself and do these really artistic looking covers. The first one was the original Epic Mickey,
Hmm.
and they just get these incredible artists to contribute this awesome art, and it looks unlike any magazine that I can think of, right? Like it looks like it belongs like framed, and that's what I actually do. I frame my cover stories. They're all like laid out on the wall right here in front of me, and it just the integrity of Game Informer and the way their personalities shone through, but also still remained uniformed in the approach that they took to the industry was really attractive to me. And also, like, it's just there's something special about print. Like I said, before I was doing freelancing for official Xbox magazine, so I had already gotten published in like probably like 6 or 7 issues of their print magazine before they went under, and it was really cool to have that as a keepsake. And so that was just one thing. I mean, and it wasn't just Game Informer that I was applying to. I applied to work at Joystick and IGN full time as well, outside of just being a freelance capacity. And it just never happened there. So
Hmm.
I'm sure I would have. They had a lot of special people working for them as well, and they still, at least IGN still has a lot of amazing folks that I know working there to this day. The thing that I wasn't aware of when I joined Game Informer is just how tight knit the group was. Um, when I joined in 2015, it was a much bigger team. It was 18 editors and a larger design department, production department, and everything. And everybody just had each other's back relentlessly. And it was something that it truly felt special. Every day at work, we worked really, really hard, but at the same time, it felt like a lot of the time we were just like there at the office hanging out with friends, even though I don't want to like make it seem like, oh, we didn't work at all, but because like we worked our butts off. But like putting out a magazine every month is a huge undertaking, especially
Yeah.
for a team that even at 18 editors back in 2015, I would still argue was slightly understaffed. Fast forward 9 years, and we were down to 7 editors, and it was an even more monumental undertaking. But it's just it was a changing of the times, and we adapted extraordinarily well, particularly when COVID made it so we were all kind of shut down and not going into the office. We all adapted extremely well, and we were able to streamline our processes so fantastically when you consider the position we were in, where we would have 7 editors and we still had a website that we had to update every day, a podcast we produced every week, a YouTube channel, a Twitch channel, and then also a magazine that we put out every 5 weeks. And it was incredible that we got every magazine out uh, on time, even though there were a few close calls. But it was, given the circumstances that were out of our control, the teams that we had, whether you're talking the team back in 2015 or the team that unfortunately was just let go because of the closure earlier this month, just some of the most special people I've ever known. I continually go back to the fact that, like, yes, video gaming is my eternal hobby, right? I think I've ever since I first picked up an NES controller at my cousin's house and played either the original Legend of Zelda or I played Mario and Duck Hunt, I I knew that I was going to love this hobby until the day that I die, and I'm almost certain that I'm going to be in my 60s, 70s, 80s, God willing, and still be playing whatever the latest games are. And even still, my favorite part of the industry isn't the video games; it's the people, right?
Yeah.
Like I love going
Hmm.
to these events. I love meeting new folks who are doing incredible work in this industry. I traveled pretty relentlessly in the past 3 years just because I loved meeting these folks. And I went to Poland earlier this year to meet the team behind 11-bit studios and play Frostpunk and the Alters and talk to those teams, because they're teams I've never met before, and I always wanted to meet the folks who are doing these really cool things. And then of course, like going to like things like the Game Awards and Summer Game Fest and E3 prior to that, you get to you know rub shoulders and elbows, whatever the term is, with some of the most incredible creators that have ever existed in the space. Just having these encounters with folks like Todd Howard and Ed Boon, and back when it was E3 and Nintendo was in attendance, getting to talk to Takashi Tezuka, Eiji Aonuma, Shigeru Miyamoto. It was just getting to have those opportunities. The people are far and away my favorite part of this industry, and that extends doubly so for the people at Game Informer. So that's what made Game Informer most special, I think. And outside of that, having such an installed reader base, at its peak, which I think it was like 2017 or so, we were up to about the 7 million subscriber mark. So it was just, the magazine. when it was closed was just about 33 years old. So
Yeah.
we had people who had subscribed for decades, and that's not something that a lot of publications have. It's like, yeah, some people have subscribed to like Time Magazine, Rolling Stone, places like that, the long running publications, but most publications, as you had indicated, just don't make it that long.
Yeah.
Like,
That's
and it's
true.
unfortunate
Especially
because
video game publications. Yeah.
yeah, it's a shame that so many publications drop out like that, because there are so many creative and talented folks that want to create content in the industry, and for whatever reason the publications are closed or aren't receiving the proper funding that they can bring on these folks. And yeah, that's the disheartening part, but the heartening part has been the response from the community in, like, in reaction to the closure, bringing like just the most amount of love I've ever seen. It was former Game Informer editor Marcus Stewart, I think, or maybe it was former video editor Alex Van Aken. One of them, I was on a podcast with the two of them at the same time, and they said they made the perfect parallel, that it was almost as if we were in attendance to our own funeral, because so many people were saying all these nice things. And
Yeah.
I've always hammered home that, like, tell the people who make the content that you love how much you truly love it while they're still around, while they're still doing it, because at a certain point, like, it's great to get that support once the website or the magazine is no more, but it's like, not, and I'm not just saying this for Game Informer. I'm saying this for everybody, whether it's somebody
Yeah.
on YouTube or Twitch or IGN or the Sega Lounge. Like, tell these people that you love the stuff they do, if you love it, because they hear it when people hate it. I'll tell you that
Oh
much.
yeah, for sure.
Um, so I mean, and I got so much love from the community when the closure happened. Like, I've said it on a couple shows now that, like, at first my Twitter app was just crashing whenever I opened it, because I was getting so many notifications. Now that might be because Elon fired all the quality assurance folks, or it might just be that because I had, like, I think I had at one point like 140 notifications within the first like few minutes of the news hitting. And
Hmm.
so much of it was positive. So many, like you said, so many people were sharing like their favorite Game Informer memories, their favorite Game
Yeah.
Informer articles. So yeah, that was a very long-winded way of telling you what was special about Game Informer. I would say the people that work there, the legacy it brings, and then the readers that sustained it for 33 years.
That's a great answer. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, I had on the show Mark Hughes last week, who actually designed one of the covers for Sonic Superstars, the Sonic Superstars edition of
Yeah,
Game Informer,
on my
and
wall right now.
oh yeah, it's a great piece. And we were talking about the fact that we didn't really realize, not being in the US, how big the the impact of Game Informer was, and he also was realizing the reach of the magazine and what it meant to so many people. So yeah, thank you for sharing that answer. Awesome, thank you very much. But I don't want to dwell on that. So we will keep it positive and happy, right? You do something on your show, which again people should check out. We're fans of Nintendo here as well. So yeah, not just Sega.
Hey,
The
Genesis does
console
what
wars,
Nintendo don't.
exactly. The console wars are over, at least between Sega and Nintendo. Anyway, so one of the things you do when you have a new guest on the show is you do the first and best, right? Game, or
Yeah,
first
for
and favorite, something like that.
first Nintendo game, favorite Nintendo game.
Yeah, so I want to do the same for you, but in regards to Sega games. So,
Perfect.
and I didn't ask you in advance, so whatever comes to mind, first Sega game, favorite, best, whatever, the most notable, tell me, please.
Absolutely. So, I've told this story on my show probably more times than people care to listen to it. But when I had my first ever console was the Super Nintendo, and I got it under the tree for Christmas. And then a couple years went by. I absolutely adored it. And my family was like, "Hey, guess what? We're moving to Florida." And I was living in Maryland at the time, and I was like, "Okay." And then our house ended up selling way faster than we expected. So the house in Florida was not ready for us yet. So we had to move in with my grandparents. It was about 30 or 35 minutes away from where I was living at the time. And so we did that, and we went to go set up the Super Nintendo, and they go, "Uh-oh, we accidentally packed it way in the back, and we can't get to it." So they'd already taken me away from all my friends in the neighborhood, and now they also took away my video game console by complete accident. So here I am, like living in my grandparents for I think we were there for like 3 or 4 months. So they were like, well, we can't not have him have any friends around, and we can't, and also no video games.
And you
So
were like asking, "Why do you hate me so much?" and things like that. Yeah.
So my parents were like, okay, well, my grandfather had a membership to BJ's Wholesale Club, which is just a membership based like club that you can go in and buy things at a discount. And sometimes they would have exclusive like bundles and everything of entertainment stuff. So you get like movies bundled together for cheaper, or in this case, a Sega Genesis that was bundled together with, I think it came with a second controller, Echo the Dolphin, and Sonic the Hedgehog 2. And
That's a nice
I had
bundle.
it is, and I had heard about Sonic, and I'd seen like the cartoon and everything. So I was excited about that. So that was naturally the first one that I fired up, and I was blown away by it. As soon as I reached Chemical Plant Zone, immediately that song was ingrained in my skull for the rest of my life. Still one of the greatest video game songs of all time.
For
And
sure.
I played it to death. I love Sonic 2, but I went out and at the time I bought Sonic 1, and I was like, "Oh, this is good, but not as good, but still fun. I'm glad that I played it." But that leads me to my favorite Sega game, and that is I'm going to I don't know if this is cheating, but Sonic 3 and Knuckles.
It's not. It was supposed to be one game, so yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
So, Sonic 3 and Knuckles, one of my favorite video games of all time, and easily my favorite Sega game. Uh, Though I will say the only thing that challenges it, I mean, I was a Genesis kid. I mean, in addition to having the Super NES, I played a lot of Genesis, and Sonic quickly became my obsession as soon as especially Sonic 3 and Knuckles, and then I got like crazy into the Archie comic series that was running at the
Yeah.
time, the Sonic Archie comics, and the cartoons, everything you could imagine with Sonic. I was just consuming. Even like I had a Game Gear because I wanted to play all the portable Sonic games. I maintain that maybe this is an opinion that will have aged poorly at this point, but I think the Game Gear version of Sonic Spinball is better than the Genesis version. Um, so
Hmm.
I played a lot of the
Maybe.
spin-offs. I mean, I just think the physics feel wonky
Maybe.
on
Maybe.
the Genesis version,
I'm
but
not a big fan of the Genesis one, to be honest. So yeah, I think I've played the Game Gear, the 8-bit one, on one of those collections
yeah,
at some point, but I can't really remember. So,
I
but
think it's
maybe
included in
it
Sonic
feels
Origins
tighter.
Plus.
Oh yeah, probably yeah.
It just
One
felt
of
a
the
little
Game
bit
Gear
tighter to me.
games. Yeah, probably.
Yeah. So I was playing everything, and then like I didn't have another Sonic or Sega console until the Dreamcast.
Hmm.
But the only Sega game that may challenge Sonic 3 and Knuckles is a very recent Sega game. Not technically a Sega game, but also very much technically a Sega game. And that's Persona 5.
Oh, I wasn't expecting that.
I mean, because I never think of it as a Sega game, but it absolutely is.
It is.
Sega
It is a
owns
Sega.
Atlas.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was expecting like something like Sonic Mania. Not technically a Sega game, but okay, but it is okay.
Oh, I love Sonic Mania. I mean,
Persona
T
5.
Lopes T Lopes did
Yeah,
the theme song to my podcast when I took it
yeah, that's
independent.
true.
I wanted to signal it as like kind of a new era, and I had been using one of those songs that you can just like get, like if you pay for a subscription, you can get like a license free or whatever,
Uh-huh.
for the first several years of all things Nintendo. And then when I took it independent, I actually reached out to T Lopes, who had been on the show a few times, and I was like, "Hey, love to have you do a thing for my podcast." And he was very gracious with his time, and he brainstormed with me and was amazing putting together the way I describe it. The theme song that he created, it almost sounds as though T Lopes made a Mario Kart song, and it's beyond anything I could have imagined. Like, whenever you ask somebody, like even if you tell them what you're looking for, like you can ask for exactly what you're looking for, and then it could come back and you're like, I don't know about this. I knew as soon as the beat drops the first time I listened to it, I'm like, oh yeah, this is my new theme song. This is fantastic.
Yeah,
And
yeah, it's a great song.
he was awesome. And so yeah, I love Sonic Mania. I mean, as
Mhm.
much as I adore Sonic 3 and Knuckles, I think Sonic Mania is probably the best Sonic game. It just doesn't have that nostalgia factor for me that Sonic 3 and Knuckles will always have.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's what I usually answer. A little bit differently, but my favorite Sonic game is Sonic 2
Okay.
for nostalgia
That's fair.
reasons. Yeah, that I usually say I understand Sonic 3 and Knuckles is objectively the better game. Yes, it is. It's probably I probably play right now like more recently I've been playing Sonic 3 and Knuckles every now and then, and I usually play Sonic 3 and Knuckles more often than Sonic 2. But the nostalgia associated with Sonic 2, it's just like you can't beat that. But the best 2D Sonic game for me is Sonic Mania, hands down.
It's
It made me
extremely good.
so
Yeah.
happy when it came out. It just doesn't have that nostalgia factor, that Sonic 2 and Sonic 3 and Knuckles, and even the original Sonic have. So I totally get what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, although I will say that man, like it's hard to compare the two just because I love both of them so much. Sonic 3 and Knuckles, I feel, is the perfect Sonic game. I don't think there's anything that anybody could do, whether it be Takashi Iizuka, whether it be Naoto Oshima, or Christian Whitehead, that could top Sonic 3 and Knuckles. Like we've seen Sonic Mania, and it came very close, if not surpassing it. And then Sonic Superstars is also quite good, but it just doesn't have that magic that Sonic 3 and Knuckles has.
I do enjoy Sonic Superstars very much, more than probably most people that I know, at least. But objectively speaking, it's not as good as the classic games, if you will.
Hmm.
I consider Sonic Mania as one of the classic games, even if it does improve, the original formula quite substantially. I would say it's like a more polished version of Sonic 3 and Knuckles, if you will, perhaps.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And I the biggest thing that knocks down Sonic 3 and Knuckles for me in 2024 is that we can't get those three songs. We can't, or the three zone songs. What is it? Ice Cap, Casino Night,
Launch base.
and Launch Base. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
some phenomenal music in there. Like I
for sure.
wish there was some way to mod the console versions to put those songs back because God, I get it that like the beta versions that they included in Sonic Origins were like the original songs,
Hmm.
but I mean, I even listened to Hard Times by the Jetsons, the unreleased B-side that took the sample of Sonic 3 and Knuckles, or Sonic 3's Ice Cap Zone.
Hmm.
I listened to that unironically as like just a good
It's
song
a great
because that beat
song.
is so good. And
Hard
it's like,
times, happiest days of our lives, for
yeah,
sure,
and I
for
wish that
sure.
they would have some sort of deal that they could strike with these bands and like just acquire the rights to these songs
Yeah.
that pretty blatantly take some of the instrumentation or samples from those songs, and like
Hmm.
there's got to be some deal that could be struck unless it's just tied up in limbo, right? Like it's
I don't know.
I
I
don't
know
know.
how much uh, legal stuff is going on. Maybe Michael Jackson's family. Maybe I don't know. I
I've
have no
tried to get
idea.
to the bottom of it, and people
It's
are
hard to
very
get a
cagey to talk about
conclusive
it.
answer. Yeah, yeah, that's
Even
true.
off the record, I have tried to talk to people about
Same.
it, and they just will not budge on anything. They'll either plead ignorance or they will say, "Oh, that's a touchy subject. I can't talk about it."
Even off the record, I got answers like, you can't believe everything that you hear or read. But Michael Jackson wasn't involved. You just can't believe everything. But just tell me yes or no. Yeah, you really shouldn't believe everything that you hear about things. Okay, okay.
Maybe one day the
One day,
actual
one
truth
day.
will come out. But
Exactly.
what we can say is that that is definitely the beat from Hard Times on Ice Cap Zone.
For sure. I would advise you to play, if you haven't yet, Sonic 3 Angel Island Revisited, which is
I
like
have it. Yes.
you have? Yeah, that's probably the definitive Sonic 3 and Knuckles, or version of Sonic 3 and Knuckles, with
One of
the
the
original soundtrack and everything.
one of the first TikToks that I did that like kind of like even moderately blew up was I just recorded the intro of gameplay of uh Angel Island Revisited of Ice Cap Zone of Sonic snowboarding down the hill as the beat drops, and it's just like it's such like one of the coolest sequences in 90s video games.
Yeah, for sure.
And I just like posted it and I was like, this section of Sonic 3 did not have to go so hard. And like the Sonic community found that and like, was just like crazy about it. So like I have a huge affinity for Angel Island Revisited.
Yeah, it's a great one. Yeah. Awesome. So thank you for sharing. Oh, by the way, Persona 5 why? Just briefly.
It's
I
my
mean, why
second
not,
favorite.
right? It's a great
Yeah.
game, but why? Please
It's my
explain.
second favorite RPG of all time. And I think it's among the most perfect turn-based RPGs ever created. Persona 5 Royal in particular, I think it
Yeah.
streamlined a lot of the stuff that Persona 5, which again, either version is up there. Final Fantasy X is my favorite RPG of all time.
Okay.
But Persona 5 was the one that finally topped Pokemon Red and Blue for that number 2 spot. And the story is fun. The thing that Persona always does so well is by the end of the game, and they're all very long, right? Persona 3, Persona 4, Persona 5, all extremely long titles, especially Persona 5. But by the end of it, you've spent so much time with these characters, you've developed relationships with this cast of characters. They feel like actual friends by the time the adventure ends. And like you're just kind of like at the end when the credits are rolling, you're like, oh, I don't get to see my friends
Yeah.
anymore. And that's why I played Persona 5 Strikers, because it's like,
Hmm.
oh, it's like a sequel, even if it's not technically canonical. It's like, oh, it's like more time to like go on a road trip with my friends. Like that's so cool. And
Yeah.
like spend more time with that cast of characters. And then like Persona 5 Tactica, I didn't ever spend a significant amount of time, but I was like, okay, it's going to be more of that. And that's all I need. I love like the turn-based tactics of Persona 5 Tactica. It came out at a time where I was way too busy to devote any real amount of time to it. So I want to go back to it now that I have a little bit of extra time now. So but then again, we have all
Yeah.
these other
Yeah.
games coming out because we're officially in fall holiday release schedule.
It's going to be a
Where
very busy fall, right? Fall
yeah, I
slash
mean
winter
we have
time.
Visions of
Yeah.
Mana, we have Star Wars Outlaws on the immediate
Hmm.
horizon. Madden and college football just came out. It's just
There's a new
it's going to
Zelda
be an onslaught.
game
Yeah, Echoes of
coming
Wisdom
soon.
is going to
Echoes
be
of
a huge
Wisdom.
part of my fall.
Yeah.
Obviously, having a Nintendo podcast, but
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
I can relate. I can relate. Yeah. The struggle is real here with, you know, going back to your backlog and playing everything. I actually have to say I agree with everything that you just said. I'm not a big turn-based RPG fan. Never was growing up, and so I actually try to get into that because of, it's there are so many good RPGs that Sega made, and so I tried getting into a few. I'm a very big fan of Valkyria Chronicles, which is a slightly
okay.
different type of turn-based RPG.
Mhm.
And I think Persona 5 Golden was the first uh, actually proper turn-based RPG that I really got into,
So
and it clicked
let
with
me
me.
ask you this. Let me ask you this. If that's your first Persona, is that
No,
always
it's
going to be your
not.
but
It's
your first
not.
one that clicked with you, at
Yeah,
least?
I played Persona 4 Golden on the Vita
Mhm.
back in the day, and I enjoyed as you said, the characters, the relationships, but the turn based battle system threw me off of it a little bit. Maybe played through, halfway through the game, and
Oh,
then
okay.
it was probably more of a case of, oh, there's this new game to play now, and I'm really not that invested in this because I'm having a hard time getting through this dungeon or something. And okay, so I'm just gonna put this down for a little bit and never came back to it. But Persona
I've been
5
there way too many
Golden,
times.
yeah, but Persona 5 Golden, that happened with it. I think it was I started playing it when it came on Game Pass, which was very close to the release of Sonic Frontiers. And I played almost until the end. Then Sonic Frontiers came out. I started playing Sonic Frontiers, but then I came back to see the game through and completed it. But it was the first time that I feel like a turn-based RPG really clicked with me, and I really enjoyed the battle systems and everything. Everything, not just the battles themselves, but like the visual style, the, as you said, the characters, the relationships. They really flesh out those characters, and you really get to know them.
Mhm.
I never played Strikers, but I played Tactica
Okay.
quite a bit, and don't think the general consensus is very positive around that game. It's just like, yeah, it's a Persona 5 spinoff. I really
Mhm.
enjoyed it, actually. Uh, Another type of game that I really don't play too much, like more tactical RPGs. Maybe Valkyria Chronicles again is another exception. I really love the Valkyria Chronicles series,
If
but
with that in mind, you might want to check out Strikers. And the reason I say that, I'm not a Musuo guy either.
yeah,
Like, I'm assuming that's the reason you've stayed away from it because,
yeah,
like, you're not a big fan of that gameplay style. They do a fantastic job, and I think this is the first time that they did this, where they implemented, because it's Omega Force that developed it, but it was also overseen by Atlas.
hmm,
So you have all the trademark pieces of Persona, but in the format of that game. But the gameplay itself, when you're doing just like your standard attack, it is that Musuo style. But then if you call your persona, it changes to turn based,
okay,
or like it freezes all the action while you select what attack you want to do. So it capitalizes on the original gameplay format. So it's like this fusion of the high intensity like action that you get from like the Dynasty Warriors or Hyrule Warriors
hmm,
series, but then you can freeze time when you call your persona and take your time and like do that. And then all the while, you're still having these amazing character moments. You're uncovering like some conspiracy behind like
yeah,
why bad things are happening in Japan. And it's also all about a road trip from Tokyo down. I think you go to the southern points of Japan. So like you see a lot of different environments as well, which is very cool to see. And again, the main attraction for me is not the gameplay, it's not the story, it's spending more time with these characters, and that is why I enjoyed that game so much. But also the gameplay was much more tolerable to someone who doesn't really like those
hmm,
styles of games.
hmm.
Like I played through Hyrule Warriors just because I love Zelda so much, but I
Same.
wasn't like obsessed with the game. I was like, okay, this is really fun to see these characters and control Ganondorf and all that. But I like the gameplay of Persona 5 Strikers so much more than I like the gameplay of Hyrule Warriors.
Mhm. Yeah, I need to check it out. It's not really a case of not liking the gameplay or not thinking that it's for me. It's just a matter of I hadn't played the original or Royal or anything before Strikers, and so
Hmm.
I didn't really even give it the time of day. I didn't even consider getting the game. But now that I've become a Persona 5 fan, I think I need to try that as well. Yeah. And people,
You
and I
absolutely
think
should.
the general consensus around Strikers is more positive than Tactica for sure. Or at least
I
more
think
people
so.
played it. Maybe that's the case. I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like it was also like on the kind of the tail end of the Persona 5 adoration, right? Like cuz Persona
Yeah.
5 Royal came out in March 2020, I believe, or April 2020. All I remember is I was reviewing Persona 5 Royal for Game Informer, and the review code came in early February, I believe. And so I was social distancing before everything was shut down. I was social distancing before it was cool, because I was like, oh, I have to power through this game. So I would play it every night until like midnight or 1 a.m. And then I was like, oh, I'll make up for all this by going out and being super social once I finish this review. And then a week before I
Oops.
finished it, COVID shut everything down. So it did not work out that way. So
Yeah.
I had a month on everybody else in terms of like when I was social distancing. But I Persona 5 Strikers, I think, was what, early 2021. So it was kind of hot on the
Probably.
heels of
Yeah.
Persona 5 Royal. So there was still like that adoration. And then Tactica, you have a couple years between
Yeah, that's
Strikers
true.
and then when Tactica came out last year. So I do think that it may have cooled a little bit, even though there is still so much love for the Persona 5
Yeah,
series.
that's a good point. That's a good point. We actually have to get you back on the show to talk about Persona 5. We need
Oh,
to
absolutely.
make that happen. Yes, yes. Okay. People would maybe be surprised that the idea for you coming on the show is to talk about Sega games on Nintendo consoles, though. So now
Yes.
that we know about your favorite games, and we could go on tangents about all of these other Sega games that you clearly love as well, Brian. I think it's time to get into the main like topic of our discussion here of our podcast episode. Full disclosure, the original idea was Sega games on the Game Boy Advance, following a very short episode that I put out last month or so, like the second part of my Sega story, focusing more on handhelds. And the Game Boy Advance was actually my first ever handheld console. If you're not considering like those like Tetris clones, like Brick Mania stuff, and like those Tiger like electronics consoles, the first actual proper handheld console that I owned and played was the Game Boy Advance. But then we decided to expand and go wider in terms of scope and focus on Sega games on Nintendo consoles. I have a question for you though.
Sure.
Do you know what the first Sega game on a Nintendo system was?
Was it Sonic Advance?
This was a trick question. Because that was the first that was the first Sonic game on a Nintendo console after Sega, actually ever, and also after Sega went third party. Did you know, Brian, that prior to Sega being a third party or went full third party, they actually had games licensed and released for Nintendo consoles in Japan?
Oh, really?
Yeah, I found this out as well when researching this. So, for example, for the family computer games, no, for the family computer system, sorry, there were games released in Japan only, like Fantasy Zone 1987, published actually by Sunsoft. Okay, so licensed by Sega, Sega developed game, but published by Sunsoft. Alien Syndrome 1988, also published by Sunsoft. Fantasy Zone 2, The Tears of Opa Opa, 1988, Sunsoft as well. Then Takara published Space Harrier in 1989. Afterburner 2, 1989, was Sunsoft as well. And Asmic published Juwoki, which is a game I'm not familiar with, in 1990. Do you know what Juwoki is?
I don't.
It's Altered Beast.
Oh,
it's the Japanese name for Altered Beast. So it was also published on the family computer, on the Famicom.
So it was a trick question.
It was a trick question. Then US only games on the NES, and all published by Do you pronounce it Tengen or Tengen? I've heard it both ways.
I've heard it. I've heard it and said it both ways. I think I usually say Tengen.
Tengen, yeah. Okay, so Tengen published Afterburner 2 in 1989, Alien Syndrome also in 89, Shinobi 89, and Fantasy Zone 90. These were not approved by Nintendo though. So but they were released in the US only. You'd be surprised to know that there were also Game Boy games. Like Penguin Land in 1990, published by Pony Canyon. Head On in 1990, published by Tecmo. And then there were other publishers who, in a second wave of releases, published some other Game Boy Color, Super Famicom, and Nintendo 64 games licensed by Sega. So, very briefly, Pocket Puyo Puyo Sun, published by Compile, Puyo Puyo Gaiden, Puyo Wars, Columns...
Puyo Wars, okay.
Puyo Wars. Puyo Puyo Gaiden, Puyo Wars, of course. What else? Puyo, all the Puyo. Columns GB, Tezuka Osamu Characters. This was published by Media Factory. This was another Puyo spin-off, Arle no Buken Maho no Duel, Apologies for my amazing pronunciation. Uh,
I'm
Compile
sure
as
you nailed
well.
it.
Of course, of course. Sakura Tyson GB. Geki Hanagumi Ryutai. An adventure game based on the Sakura Wars game for the Game Boy Color. And Pocket Puyo Puyo N in 2000. So there were Game Boy
Wow.
Color games. Columns was released in Japan only as well, 1999 on the Super Famicom. And Puyo Puyo N Party was released in 1999 in Japan only on the Nintendo 64. So it really was
Jeez.
a trick question. There were a lot of Sega games, not really published by Sega though, right? So they
Yeah, I'll
licensed
stick
these
with my answer
games.
of Sonic Advance.
But I found this interesting because I had no idea that there were other Sega games on Nintendo consoles prior to their big announcement in early 2001 that they were discontinuing the production of the Dreamcast and going third party only.
Hmm.
By the way, uh, do you remember that announcement? Do you remember how you felt? Was it like a big thing for you or not really?
Oh, it absolutely was a big thing for me. I had saved up all my money to as it was 2000 or 1999, so I was in like 7th grade and I saved up all my money from like doing chores, washing cars, cutting grass, stuff like that to buy a Dreamcast and buy all kinds of games for it and everything. And I was enamored with Sonic Adventure and I was so hyped for Sonic Adventure 2. And then the announcement came, like, I think it was shortly before Sonic Adventure 2 came out that they were going to be discontinuing the Dreamcast. And it really put a damper on the 10th anniversary celebration that Sonic Adventure 2 was supposed to be. And yeah, just really remember being like, oh man, did I like hitch my wagon to a bum horse here? Because like I saved up all this money. I was like, no, I'd rather have a Dreamcast than a PlayStation 2 because the PS2 was essentially, Sega saw the writing on the walls as the PS2 was about to come out and was like, oh, there's no way we're going to be able to go blow for blow with them. And not to mention, GameCube and Xbox was also Microsoft was entering the arena as well.
Hmm.
So Sega bowed out, and I remember just being like, "Oh man, I hope that means that like we're still going to get Sonic games." And like, what does this mean? Like, also Shenmue 2 hadn't come out yet, so I'm like, in the U.S. It came out in Japan, but not in the U.S. And I was
Yeah.
obsessed with the first Shenmue game, so
Nice.
I was like really concerned about that game. Like, is it ever going to come out? And then eventually did come out for original Xbox. Um, so yeah, I was just really upset about this system that I loved so much and had so many great times with, having friends over to play Power Stone 2 and whatever other games, Toy Commander. Um, just
Awesome.
the time of our lives at that point,
Yeah.
playing with the four. It was the spiritual successor to the Nintendo 64 in that it had the 4 controller ports. So it was an unbelievable like, hey, let's get our friend group together and just have like order some Domino's or whatever pizza place we wanted to order from, get some Coke, and then just like stay up all night playing these 4-player multiplayer titles. And the PlayStation 2 only had 2 controller ports, and I didn't know much about the GameCube or the Xbox. I didn't know they were going to have 4 controller ports, but I
Hmm.
was like, oh man, are we ever going to get like 4-player games ever again? So that was another layer of sadness on top of it. But yeah, I have a lot. I have a great fondness for the Dreamcast,
Hmm.
and I think that Sonic Adventure and Sonic Adventure 2 really changed the course of not only my gaming taste but also my music taste because I loved the soundtracks of those games so much.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I did actually. I've talked extensively to several developers on this subject, and like people who were involved with Sonic and even Mario about the transition of Sega coming to Nintendo, and it's fascinating to see kind of like the disparate um, viewpoints that so many of them take.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. I like it like that. Usually, most guests that I have on the show, when we talk about the Dreamcast, we usually have similar experiences in terms of like it being the first console that we own and bought with our own money or something like that. Uh, so, and like the things that stick to us to this day are usually the same. You mentioned the music and like how Sonic Adventure in 1 and 2, changed how you approached video games, maybe the genres, the type of games, and the type of music that you
Just
enjoy.
music in general.
In
Like
general,
I
yeah,
it's
definitely.
pushed me down this path of loving rock music so
Yeah.
much that, I ended up founding or co-founding
Yeah.
a rock music website to kinda kickstart the career that I've now been doing for about 16 years. So yeah,
Mhm. Yeah. I have the same experience with Sonic Adventure 1 and 2 and Shenmue as well. Because it
Shenmue's
opened
amazing.
up my eyes to, it's still my favorite game of all time to this day. And it opened up my
Wow.
eyes to like the uh, the orchestral music in general and the power of music in storytelling and in video games and movies and whatnot. So it really, I say this a lot on this show, but it shaped, it had a great deal in how I turned out to be this messed up person that I am.
I got to sit down with, on the day that Shenmue 3 was, officially announced at
Mhm,
E3. I was, I had covered that press conference, and it's funny because I remember this was my first time being at E3 for Game Informer, and there were all these games that people were like, "Oh, these are never coming out," and then or they're never even going to get announced. And I remember earlier on in the press conference, they had The Last Guardian,
mhm.
which was a long in development, feared canceled game, and Sony had it at their press conference. And then like a few trailers later, it was Final Fantasy VII Remake getting announced, and it was like the long rumored game at that point. And I was just I looked over at our news editor at the time, and I said, "Watch, Shenmue 3 will be next." And then what do you know? The next trailer was Shenmue 3. He looked at me like he saw a ghost. And
Yeah.
I actually I got a text shortly after the Sony press conference saying, "Hey, do you want to interview Yu Suzuki?" And so I got to sit down with Yu Suzuki and talk to him about like the process of getting this game greenlit. And I did tell him that at one point, Shenmue was the original Shenmue was one of my favorite games of my entire life. And yeah, he was very gracious, and he's a genius. So it was
Yeah,
really
for
cool to
sure.
sit down with him.
I think he doesn't get recognized enough and acknowledged for his contribution to video game history. But that's another topic for another day. Yeah, I still remember to this day. I was watching. So I'm a little bit older than you, not so much like maybe I'm guessing like 3 4 years older than you. Uh, so that's why we probably have similar experiences. But I do remember being at home. It was like probably midnight, 1 a.m. my time, and I was watching the press conference in hopes, like every year before that, that would get anything Shenmue related. I was actually, I
Mhm.
think I was lying on the couch, my living room, just like almost falling asleep, and then the first few notes of the theme song, and I was like, no. And I just jumped up and I screamed, yes, Shenmue. My wife was sleeping in the bedroom and she was like, shh, what's wrong? What happened? What happened? Did someone die? No, it's Shenmue. It's Shenmue. And she was really annoyed, but it was Shenmue. Shenmue 3 finally getting announced. It was an amazing time. Good memories. Good memories. But
Yeah.
Sega on Nintendo. Don't talk to me about Shenmue, Brian. I can go on for days, for days, as people know very well, as listeners know. But yeah, so it was a dark day for Sega fans when Sega announced that they would cease production. So they actually announced this on January 30th, 2001. They would cease production of the Dreamcast on March 31st of that same year, which was the end of the fiscal year. So they wanted to get all their losses in that same year so they could turn a page the next fiscal year. And then they began making games as a third party developer. The first game that they put out on a third party system or as a third party developer was actually Choo Choo Rocket on the Game Boy Advance. Uh, Released March 21st, 2001 in Japan, June 6th, US, December 7th in Europe. So that was the
Okay, so I was
first.
wrong even with my Sonic Advance
Yeah, yeah,
guess.
yeah. Sonic Advance was
So
the
I won't.
first Sonic game, right? That's why it's really big.
I won't.
Um,
I will no longer be stubborn about having that be my answer.
and the second one was Super Monkey Ball on the GameCube. That was
Mm,
the first GameCube game, September
awesome game.
14th in Japan. Yeah, iconic.
I
November
love the second one.
18th. One and two are highly regarded as the best still, right?
Oh,
This new
Banana
one, Banana
Blitz.
Ramble, was,
Banana Rumble. Yeah, Banana
yeah,
Blitz is the Wii one that we remastered. Then there's Banana
yeah,
Mania, and then this is Banana Rumble. Yeah, they
yeah,
very very confusing nomenclature there.
yeah. They should just start. I said this before on the show. They should have named this Super Monkey Ball 3 instead of
That
Banana Ramble.
Yeah, because then how does it differentiate from the HD remasters that they did? It doesn't.
It doesn't. It's just one
Yeah.
of the bananas. It's really hard,
Mhm.
really confusing. Yeah. So I don't want to dwell too much on this. You do a fantastic job on your show, and that's another reason for people to watch or listen to your podcast. You go on this like very detailed research and share some interesting facts. I actually found an interview that IGN back in the day, November 2001, did with Charles Belfield, who was the vice president of strategic planning and corporate affairs at Sega of America. And they talked to him about developing games for Nintendo consoles, which was really odd considering the rivalry and up until then, and the console wars that you so well covered on the last episode of your podcast as well. Uh,
Thanks.
yeah, great show. Go listen to that, everyone. But so they asked, were there any particular reasons why Sega did make its entrance on a Nintendo platform? And he just said it was the fastest as to development time we could bring a game to a platform. There was not a strategic reason why Nintendo before any of the others. It was just in terms of our development team could bring that game to market quicker than any of the others. Secondly, it was the suitability of that target demographic, and that Amusement Vision could bring out the game quicker than, let's say, Sonic Team with a new version of Sonic. So we were able to move forward quicker with that game. So speaking here of, we're talking of Choo Choo Rocket on the GBA, which is interesting. And this is an interesting thing that happened. So we were used to having all Sega games of all genres on the same system. And what Sega did, probably a good decision. I don't know, in terms of like business strategy. They segmented their genres into the different systems that were available at the time. So Nintendo got some of them, mostly Sonic and like the cutesy, cartoony characters were there. Then we had like sports and other types on PS2 and Xbox. Usually, the more realistic ones on Xbox,
Mhm.
perhaps like Shenmue 2 and stuff. Just as radio went to Xbox as well. What do you think, looking back? Was that a good business decision for them?
It feels weird that Shenmue was not on multiple platforms, at least on PS2. It feels like such a great fit for the PS2. I think maybe that might be in hindsight just because that's where the Yakuza series started, and the Yakuza series feels like such a spiritual successor to Shenmue
Hmm.
that it's weird that it's like, oh, Shenmue 2 was on Xbox in the US, and then, you know, Yakuza got its start on PS2, and I don't know, it just feels weird that that Shenmue would only go to Xbox. And I mean, even Jet Set Radio, I don't know. Exclusives were also very weird back then, where
Yeah,
multi-platform games were less common, or sometimes they would have like weird like differences between them. But I mean, overall, I think they matched them up fairly well. If they were going to go with an exclusive platform, I think that Sonic on GameCube made the most sense. Same thing with Super Monkey Ball. Like, yeah, either of those could be on any of them, and they eventually were, right? Like, we got Sonic Heroes across
yeah,
all the platforms. But to have like Sonic Adventure 2 Battle and Sonic Adventure DX on GameCube just made the most sense.
for sure. Yeah. Was just really hard for people who were really into the console wars of the 90s, seeing Mario and Sonic on the same platform. That was a little bit weird.
Yeah, I mean, it was weird for Tom Kalinske as well, the
Yeah.
former president and COO of or CEO of Sega of America. His quote, God, I've got to find it. I pulled up because I wrote an article back in 2016 where I talked to a lot of these developers about Sonic appearing in Mario games or in games alongside Mario, and he said, I about fell over, to tell you the truth. I still have trouble with this concept of this company that was our enemy that we fought tooth and nail against, and now they're buddies, talking about Mario and Sonic. They're very close and have a very close relationship, talking about Sega and Nintendo there.
Hmm. Yeah.
And then, yeah, it was, a lot of these developers just, it seems like the Sega developers are more, like the current ones, are a lot more optimistic about it. Like Tetsuya Mizuguchi, he was a huge proponent. And there's that famous video of him telling his development team that, like, hey, we're getting out of the console business, and he had to be the one to break the news to it. He was the creator of Rez,
Hmm.
and and then Yuji Naka, I even got a quote from him talking about how, like, it was sad that they were closing the hardware business, but hey, we get to develop these games for people who maybe have never played a Sega game before now. And that was Takashi Iizuka's sentiment as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Looking back, it was the only possible decision, you know, business wise. It had to be done, right?
Hmm.
And they're still around and still making games, so that's okay. But it was really hard at the time. I I like how part of this interview with Charles Belfield was about the death of the Dreamcast, and he said something interesting. He said, and I quote, "I think the announcement in January this year, so the announcement of discontinuing the Dreamcast, production of the Dreamcast, was done with a lot of work to it. Looking back, I think it's very amusing to see that Dreamcast was essentially hugged to death by consumers and gamers everywhere. In hindsight, everybody adored the product. It's still considered one of the best game platforms ever created for the price and the content that we had on it in the first 2 years. It was those who didn't buy Dreamcast that eventually killed the product."
Jeez.
I mean, yeah. And they didn't buy it largely because of hype created by other console manufacturers. And then he goes on a rant about the announcement of the PS2, killing the Dreamcast even before the PS2 launched. The GameCube also was announced, and that way before it launched, and that also killed the Dreamcast. Even Xbox. So he went on a rant about the competitors, and it was those who didn't buy the Dreamcast that eventually killed the product. That's sad.
It makes sense, I
It
guess.
makes
I
sense,
mean,
of
if
course, right? But it reminded me of what you were saying about Game Informer, right? And creators in general. So if you like something, buy it and tell
support
the
them,
people,
yeah.
support them somewhere, somehow. Because if you don't, you're going to kill the product or the people in some
Hopefully not
way.
the people.
Hopefully not the people. That's too dramatic. Yeah, please don't do that. Yeah, but so they went to Nintendo, and that's a fact. And it's been over 20 years since they did that in 2001. So Choo Rocket first on the GBA, Super Monkey Ball on the GameCube, both in 2001. Sonic Advance, December 2001. So the first Sonic game that was on a Nintendo console. And there were some interesting titles here. For example, speaking of the GBA alone, Sonic Advance was, according to some sources, number 25 in the best selling games on the system. So
Mm.
515,000 copies of Sonic Advance. And I'm not sure if this is worldwide. Probably not worldwide because we probably don't have the data for every part of the world. I don't know. 2001. Not sure.
A lot of those
Uh,
numbers I found are at least trying to be accurate for worldwide numbers,
yeah.
but yeah, it's hard to say for sure.
Yeah. Sonic
And
Advance
from
2
what I
was 39 as well. So I don't know. Yeah,
yeah,
sure. Sorry.
from what I uncovered in my interviews was that the reason that Sonic Adventure 2 Battle was sent over to the GameCube was because Takashi Iizuka actually petitioned Sega, like the higher ups, to be like, hey, since we're not making our systems anymore, we should put this game on Dreamcast or a GameCube. It would be a really good fit for that audience, and that's ultimately why they went with Sonic Adventure 2 Battle.
Yeah, and they thought of the connectivity between the GameCube and the Game Boy Advance as well to
Mm-hmm.
mirror in some way the Dreamcast and VMU connectivity and even expand on it, right? So if people had both systems, they could have the Chow Garden and have some extra capabilities. So that was a selling point as well.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't have the GBA, right? Only the GameCube.
I only had the GameCube. My brother had a GBA, but I never really played the Sonic Advance games, unfortunately.
I really enjoyed especially the first one. The first one, and I'm glad that it was the best selling of the series. Yeah, because I think it's the superior one. It's the closest to the classics. And then Sonic Advance 2 and especially 3, they started like just going crazy on what I call the Dimps effect. Dimps were
Yeah.
the developers and they intended with Sonic Team, but they went all out on like bottomless pits and stuff like that.
Mm.
Although not bad games, but not as easy to like as I think the original Sonic Advance. There was
I'll
Sonic
have to fire
Battle
it up
as well.
sometime.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I Sonic Advance, I think you will enjoy because it's very close to the classics. Yeah, for sure. There was Sonic Battle, Choo Choo Rocket. There was Virtua Tennis, Jet Set Radio, Space Channel 5. So there were all matters of versions of Dreamcast games released for the Game Boy Advance to different measures of success in terms of how they ported the games and how well people responded to them. Jet Set Radio was interesting. Have you ever seen that? The port of Jet Set
No,
Radio on the
I
GBA?
haven't.
It's like an isometric perspective, and it's a
Oh,
little
almost
bit.
like the Tony Hawk Pro Skater port that got to the GBA as well.
I when I see it, I remember the Micro Machines games we had on the Genesis and other systems back in the day, because you control the way you control your skater is a little bit different than probably you're used to.
Oh, I'm
Um,
seeing it right now. Yeah, I'm
yeah,
looking at gameplay of it.
yeah,
Not the prettiest game.
but still very I would say impressive considering the system
Mhm.
that we're
Definitely.
talking about, like the faux 3D and the faux cell shaded graphics here as well. I think it was I had this one actually. I had this one. I had Virtual Tennis. I was all in on the GBA, to be honest. So yeah. We also had the Nintendo DS, by the way, sticking to the handhelds. Notable games that I have on my list here. The Mario and Sonic series went to the DS. Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games in 2008, the original one, the Beijing um, Olympics. Mario and Sonic at the Winter Olympic Games, the Vancouver Winter Olympics, were the focus of this one. Everyone remembers fondly the Vancouver Winter Olympics. That was so iconic. Uh, Fets Star Zero, Puyo Pop Fever, Sega Superstars Tennis,
Hmm.
Sonic and All Stars Racing. Now we're talking. We also had Sonic Rush and Sonic Rush Adventure. Have you played these as a Sonic fan?
They also
No?
came out on PSP, right?
Not these ones, no. These
Or
were
which one?
exclusive to
What
the
am I thinking
DS.
of?
Sonic Rivals, perhaps.
Sonic Rivals. That's the one I played. I did not
Yeah.
play Sonic Rush. No.
Okay. You're missing out again. You should definitely, especially the first one. It's the one that I like the most,
It's a
Sonic
good thing
Rush.
retro games are so cheap now.
Yeah, yeah. It's really nice because you get the two screens and Sonic goes from the upper screen. So they actually use both screens during gameplay. It's not like a menu or something on the bottom screen and you have all the action on the top one. You actually move from the top to the bottom and vice versa during
Hmm.
the gameplay sections. It's really nice to the way they use both screens at the same time. Really blew my mind at the time, and I think especially the first one. And the soundtrack is amazing because it's by the creator of uh, the composer of the Jet Set Radio
Oh,
soundtrack, Hideki
that's
Naganuma.
cool.
Yeah, the first one,
So
Sonic Rush.
you mentioned Mario and Sonic at the Olympics, and I
Yeah.
also have another supporting quote here that I can pull up. This time from Shigeru Miyamoto. Actually, I asked him about the like why they went with like the Olympic style games instead of just doing like kind of like the crossover game that everybody expected them to do, which was like some sort of action or platforming game. And he said, quote, I always thought it would be great to have Sonic and Mario in the same game, but if you put them in an action game, the feeling of speed is very different, so it wouldn't have worked. So, I mean,
Mm.
makes sense, I guess, from that perspective.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that was the question at the time, I think. Why this style of game?
Yeah,
But
and
also,
apparently, Miyamoto and Izuka and Nintendo and Sega were brainstorming what to do. And here's another quote from Izuka. This one said, "I started this conversation with Nintendo, and then later, when Sega picked up the license for the Olympic Games video games, we had the foundation with Nintendo to say we want to bring Sonic and Mario together and have them appear in the same world and have them compete against each other. And we're going to use the premise of it being the Olympic Games and these characters are participating in the Olympic Games together to make that happen. It was the first great conversation about getting these characters together to compete and have fun together."
mhm. It makes sense, right? Have like a sort of a party game with these different sports,
And they're
and
there
I think
representing their retro or their respective kingdoms and
yeah,
worlds.
yeah, yeah, it makes sense. And it's a great way to use all of these great families of characters that both series have, right? You have
Absolutely.
a very huge roster of characters on both sides. Although, if so, Mario has does Mario use characters from other series?
I don't think so. I think
No,
it's
no, it
just
doesn't.
Mario Mushroom Kingdom characters.
Yeah, it's Donkey Kong, but Donkey Kong is like originally they're tied together. So yeah,
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 he's basically an honorary Mario character at this point.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, because I was thinking maybe Sonic has the larger roster, just Sonic exclusive, but no, Mario also has a huge roster of characters. Yeah,
Yeah, think of all the characters in like Mario Kart.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
There's a ton of characters to choose from.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So they released these games on both the DS and the Wii, by the way. So we'll talk a little bit more about the Mario and Sonic series in a little bit. Just wanted to go through another uh, good game. Yeah, Sonic Colors on the DS was also
Hmm.
a huge one. A more like 2D like version of the Wii game. Going back a little bit to the GameCube because I skipped the GameCube for some reason because I'm old and I'm forgetting things now. The GameCube had such gems as Billy Hatcher and the Giant Egg. Did you play this one?
No, I did not.
Okay, yeah, not really my favorite, but there's like a big following, big cult following of this game, and an interesting concept, and another Sonic Team game that went to the GameCube. So
Mm.
good stuff there. Very cartoony, very like a platformer. So it makes sense. Um, there was F-Zero GX, which also blew many people's minds when it when Sega took on because Sega weren't just doing like developing a game for a Nintendo system. They were working on a Nintendo franchise. This was something big for many people. The best F-Zero game ever. I don't know. Not sure if you're on that field or not. If you've
I
played it
think
or
so.
not.
I think it's the only one that has really been able to deliver on the promise of what the F-Zero series could be, right? Because the first F-Zero was more of like a tech demo of like, hey, look how fast this game can go, but you couldn't do like multiplayer or anything. And then I feel like the GameCube version was just kind of like the better version of the N64.
Mhm. Yeah. So a port of the arcade game. No, oh, actually, no. GX was developed first, or at least released first on the GameCube. So GX and the arcade one was AX. Basically the same games, and you could like you could with some of the Dreamcast and Naomi games on the arcade. You could use a VMU to unlock stuff or save your game. You could have a memory card that you could use on both versions of F-Zero. So that was big. And there's something that I usually see online to this day is, please have Sega develop a new F-Zero game, or at least bring F-Zero GX to the Switch, or whatever the Switch successor will be, because people are still clamoring for, first of all, a new F-Zero game, or at least some sort of F-Zero content that isn't just F-Zero 99.
Yeah.
And secondly, a proper sequel to GX, which many people think is the best one in the series.
It'd
Who
be cool to
knows?
see that series return.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. We also had on the GameCube a little game called Sonic Adventure 2 Battle. So the first Sonic game on the GameCube, followed 2 years later by Sonic Adventure DX Director's Cut. There was Sonic Heroes, Sonic Mega Collection, Sonic Gems Collection, which was the first time that I actually played Sonic CD
Yeah, I think
with this collection.
I don't remember if the first time I played it was with that collection or with just Xbox Live Arcade.
Mm,
I think I recently said I played it on Xbox Live Arcade on my last episode of my podcast, but it might have been Sonic Gems was the first time I played it.
yeah. I actually played this on the PS2. I had the PS2 version.
Okay.
I didn't get a GameCube until much later. So, and then I got Sonic Adventure 1 and 2, or the GameCube versions of these. But yeah, Sonic Gems Collection, big thing. Sonic CD, Sonic the Fighters was also on it. So huge thing at the time. Shadow the Hedgehog. And this being the year of Shadow. What is it? What's the tagline? I always forget. Fearless.
Where's that?
Fearless.
Oh, okay.
No,
I was
yes,
gonna.
that's the other one. Where's that damn fourth KR Emerald? Yes.
Yeah, I did get to ask Takashi Iizuka that question during our rapid fire interview that I got to sit down with him with, and that was just one of the questions I threw his way: is where's that damn fourth Chaos Emerald? By the way, Takashi Iizuka's favorite Sonic character outside of Sonic is Shadow by a long shot. Like, he loves Shadow because it makes sense. He helped create him. So
yeah,
I mean,
yeah, that makes sense. And we will have a lot of Shadow this year. Yeah, we're already getting a lot of Shadow. It's the year of Shadow. Fearless,
really
the year of Shadow the Hedgehog. So Shadow was also on the GameCube with his guns and his foul mouth for the family. Skies of Arcadia, Dreamcast classic that I never played. It's on my backlog because, as I said before, I'm not really that big on turn-based RPGs. But now that I'm a little bit more into that, I want to just take some time and sit down and enjoy Skies of Arcadia. Have you ever played this?
I played, I think, the demo on Dreamcast. Like, there was I used to subscribe to official Dreamcast magazine, and I think one of the issues came with a demo on the demo disc for Skies of Arcadia, and I played that a few times, the early sequence that it had on there, but I never played the full game.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of people. It's another one of those that people say, please bring this to the Switch. Please do a remastered version or a sequel or something. Yeah, it's one of those. Who knows? Very quickly, Super Monkey Ball 1 and 2. Phantasy Star Online, episodes 1 and 2, and then 3 Card Revolution, also on the GameCube. So a lot of support by Sega, and a lot of Dreamcast franchises that went over to the GameCube here as well. Very briefly as well, some notable games on the Wii, since we're talking about Nintendo systems. I think one of the most interesting things on the Wii was the Virtual Console and the inclusion for the first time ever, uh, at least to my knowledge or to my memory, of an actual way of playing all these classic Genesis Mega Drive games, some exclusive to Japan prior to this, and you could play them on the Nintendo Virtual Console system,
Hmm.
um, which now we have the equivalent on the Switch with the Genesis or Mega Drive. Uh, what's it called?
The Nintendo Switch Online catalog.
Yeah, it doesn't really have a specific name, right?
No, I think it's
Switch
just like Genesis,
Online
Mega Drive,
Genesis.
Switch on. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But this was the first time on the Wii that we could do this, and they would release individual games you could pay for, obviously. And I had my Wii hard drive filled with a lot of those Mega Drive classics. Did you partake in this as well?
Oh yeah, definitely. Like I loved the Virtual Console so much, regardless of the platform. Grabbing all the NES, SNES, Genesis, N64 classics that I loved when I was growing up, and even checking out some of the ones that I didn't necessarily have a history with, just to see what, like, oh, I've heard about this game. Let me check it out. And that's why I actually have come around on the notion of the Nintendo Switch Online, is because it gives you access to the full catalog just for being a subscriber. So while you don't own the content, it does have that Netflix effect where you're like, oh, people have said they love this game, or people have said that this show is really awesome. You can fire it up because it's already a part of your subscription and not have to pay anything extra. Whereas, like, if I had to pay like $8, like I used to for like Virtual Console, I probably wouldn't check out game Y or whatever, like
Yeah.
that people tell me is good. I'm like, okay, I'll take your word for it.
Hmm. For sure, for sure. It's an easy way to have access to all these games, and they've been adding to the Genesis collection as well.
Hmm.
You know, at times, I think they recently added two or three, right? I think it was not long ago, a couple of
Yeah, I
months
think
ago.
they did. I forget which ones it was.
Yeah, but
I used
they're still adding
Yeah, it's
games.
not dead by any stretch.
No, yeah, maybe, hopefully, we get to keep this sort of like system going into the next the Switch successor, whatever it is.
That would be
Uh,
nice.
it wouldn't make sense to just change things again. But it's Nintendo. It's hard to predict.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Um, just a few notable games as well here. Again, Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games, Winter Olympic Games on the Wii as well. Samba de Amigo. There was a Wii version of Samba de Amigo. There was Knight's Journey of Dreams, a sequel to Knight's Into Dreams from the Saturn. There were a couple of poorly named monkey ball games, Banana Blitz, Step and Roll, which used the Wii balance board,
Oh
hence
wow.
step and roll. Uh, there was Sonic in Super Smash Brothers Brawl,
Yes, that was the big one.
the big one, right? Finally, people could fight Mario with Sonic or vice versa, right? That was
Hmm.
something big. Uh,
That
all
was
the
the
memes.
thing. I mean, I've told this story on my podcast, but like Tom Kalinske said that like when that happened, he stood in line at E3 to play the game, and then he chose Sonic, and then used Sonic to punch Mario in the face, and he was like, "Yeah, it was a dream come true."
Strong feelings there. Yeah. The hate was real still.
It really was.
Yeah. There was Sonic and the Secret Rings, Sonic and the Black Knight. So the storybook series was on the Wii. Sonic
Hmm.
Unleashed and Sonic Colors. Sonic Unleashed which was a in ways a little bit shorter version of the PS3 Xbox 360 game. In some ways, that's a good thing,
Yeah.
especially in terms of the last level, Eggman Land, which was really, really long on the other versions. And here it was a little bit more streamlined, which was better. And Sonic Colors. Any of these games that I spoke of stand out to you in some way
On the Wii,
or others?
I mean, a lot of them do, but like, Sonic Adventure 2 Battle, I loved because it was like, okay, well, it's the game that I liked on Dreamcast so much, and now it's over on GameCube, and I loved I like the visual upgrades and like some of the additional like modes and bonuses that you got from both that and DX. Even though people will argue over which visual style is best between Sonic Adventure One Vanilla and Sonic Adventure One DX, I don't mind either way. Sonic Colors is fantastic. One of the better Sonic games of that era. And then, yeah, I mean, Super Monkey Ball 2 is one that I played with my family a lot when we would go on like family vacations, and like we'd go to the beach and then like it would rain one day. So we would all stay inside and play Super Monkey Ball. So that was a lot of fun as well. But yeah, like so many of those games. I was never a fan of like the storybook games from the Sonic franchise. I hear that Black Knight is maybe the best out of them. Um,
Yeah, yeah, I would say so. It's easier to control. Uh, I think I played Secret Rings a little bit more.
okay.
I spent more time with it. Black Knight is, objectively speaking, probably the better game. Yeah, but it still had like that wiggling mechanic that
Sure.
could get tiresome as well. Secret Rings was just, at times it wasn't like as tiring because you didn't have to use the motion controls as much, but it was a little bit hard to maneuver the location of spikes or bottomless pits or something. There were some very cheap deaths on that one, I would say. Especially if you want to complete like the game, if you want to 100% the game or something, which is not something that I usually do. But
Mm-mm. Me neither.
yeah, I'm not that big into punishing myself with video games. I like to enjoy games. Have fun.
Same. Absolutely.
Yeah. Uh Wii U. Wii U. Any idea of notable games for the Wii U that pop into your head?
Sonic Lost Worlds, Sonic Boom, Rise of Lyric.
The best one?
Uh,
Yeah.
I actually will go to bat for the second Sonic Boom game that came to 3DS, Fire and Ice. I
Yes.
think that is actually a
Yes.
very solid 2D Sonic game.
Agreed.
Um, I think they learned a lot of lessons from those first two games, which were abysmal. Uh, what was the
And I
other
actually interviewed the developers at
Christian Sen?
Sanzaro, yeah, at Sanzaro Games. And it was, first of all, it was amazing for everyone, even for them, that they were able to come back and work on the second one. And they were given the freedom to actually improve the game and make it an enjoyable platformer in
And I mean,
this series.
that was a part of the initiative that when Ivo Gerskovich, who is the current head of the Sonic operating like business operating unit, the first thing he wanted to do was make it so like there was more quality control. And I was his first interview when he joined Sega and Sonic Team, and I was talking to him, and he was like, like that game was, really far in development, but we told them to kind of take their time and do what they needed to do to make this game better than the games that came before it. And that was really the first game that was kind of like supposed to be this turning point in the franchise in terms of
Mhm.
quality, because at that point the Sonic series was down bad, as the kids would say, but maybe in a different context.
Hard times,
Hard
as the song
times.
would go. Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, but you're right. So Sonic Boom, Rise of Lyric, Lost World, Sonic and All Stars Transformed, Racing
Yes.
Transformed was probably, I would say I'm a big fan of Sonic Lost World. I'm in the minority here, but I think Transformed is probably the big one here. And it's to this day one of my favorite card games, racing games, whatever you want to call it.
It might be the best one not named Mario Kart.
Yeah. Yeah, I would argue in some ways better than Mario Kart 8 Deluxe still. but that's the Sega
That's
fanboy
a
in
hard
me.
that's a hard one. I mean, I love Sega and I love Sonic All-Star Racing Transformed.
It's
Man,
probably
is
the
Mario Kart 8
nostalgia
Deluxe
factor.
good.
Yeah, it is. It is a great game. Yeah. I do find myself enjoying Transformed a little bit more though. I maybe it's the nostalgia of it. I don't know. The
Hey, give
fan
us a new
service
one
in
and I'll
that
be
game.
happy.
Yeah, I had a chat with Steve Lysett last year from Sumo Digital, and yeah, I'm not saying they wouldn't be open to it, but he asked me a question: what could we do to improve, to expand on this? What would we add to this? Would we be able to replicate this and even make it bigger or better? Maybe not. So I don't know. Then
Yeah, I mean, they
they
tried
went
with
on to
Team Sonic Racing and stuff,
yeah,
and it wasn't as
yeah,
good.
no, for sure. Yeah, yeah. But yeah, also on the Wii U, Bayonetta 1 and 2, which are
Mhm.
technically Sega, at least it's a Sega IP, right?
Yeah.
Developed by Platinum Games, now also funded by Nintendo, but it's still technically a Sega IP. So on the Wii U, and we had Mario and Sonic at the Sochi 2014 Winter Olympics and at Rio 2016 as well, the Olympic Games. And I'm guessing the London ones as well, probably on the Wii U.
Yeah, I mean, they
I
did
think
all
so,
of
right?
them all
Yeah,
the way up. I mean, and then the Tokyo 2020 was exclusive to Switch. I mean, obviously they're all
exactly.
exclusive to Nintendo consoles because they have Mario in them, but they, yeah, I mean, they've always been on. They did every single one up until
Yeah,
Tokyo,
yeah.
and then after that, was there? Did they do a 2022 one? I don't think they did
No, no,
for
no,
Winter
no. The
Olympics.
last one was the Tokyo
That's
one,
what I thought.
which was 2021, technically,
Yeah,
right? But yeah, and it was a great one. Probably, I
I'd
mean,
say the
the
best.
best. Yeah, not probably, definitely the best. Yeah, it was a great game.
Yeah, they had that whole
Um,
like retro aesthetic for the story mode, which was very cool.
yeah, yeah, yeah. They went all in on this apparently last one. So I want to talk a little bit about that because you already mentioned the whole Mario and Sonic rivalry. But we recently learned that uh, it's probably the end for this long running series of Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games. Apparently, the Olympic Committee wanted to go with NFTs and mobile games instead of
Yep.
a better console version of this. Thoughts on this, Brian?
I mean, it's sad to see it go, but hopefully this encourages them to explore additional crossover opportunities. I feel like even though they were still iterating on the formula, it felt like we were kind of stagnant. Even though the game itself was evolving, it was just kind of like, yeah, like I feel like this series has run its course. It's like how much it was almost like All Star Racing Transforms. Like, all right, how much more can we really do with this formula, and how can we make it better? And they tried some stuff with Tokyo 2020, but it just it was like, okay, yeah, we've been here, we've done this. This is like the seventh or eighth iteration of this game. Like we don't. I want to see them try new things if they're going to have Sonic and Mario crossover in ways outside of Super Smash Brothers.
Yeah. Maybe we can finally get that long awaited platformer. Uh,
It'd be cool.
probably not. Probably not.
I mean, we have Mario running around with a gun with the rabbits from Ubisoft.
That's true. That's true. Oh, Mario and Shadow the Hedgehog when? Mario X Shadow Generations Galaxy or something.
Oh God.
Kingdom Battle. Mario looking for that damn fourth Chaos Emerald. When? Yeah, it's sad, but I do agree with you. I'm not sure what they could, you know, do with the series other than what they did in the 2020 game. I think that's peak Mario and Sonic, and
Yeah.
it's a good way to go. But it would be nice to have the partnership rekindled in some way, in another shape or form. Maybe another party game, like or an
Eh.
actual party game. Mario and Mario X Sonic Party. I don't know. Could
Well,
be.
hopefully they did. I'm gonna call it Shuffle because Sonic Shuffle stinks.
No, it's really not that great. Okay. Um, on the 3DS front, to finish with the handhelds, I wanted to mention there are other games that we could talk about, including Sonic Boom, which we already talked a little bit about, but the 3D classics, the Sega 3D classics.
Oh yeah.
Did you experience those?
I did. They were fine. They were good versions of it. I'm just not a handheld guy, you know, like
Hmm.
I wish that that Sonic X Shadow Generations was actually going to include the 3DS version of Generations, or at least those levels, because I liked that version so much and I would like to see them get like the modernized treatment. But I feel like I just played like the 3D classics, which I did own many of them. I don't get me wrong, I bought a lot of them, but I always just played the Wii version if I was going to go with that, or whenever they would release them on Xbox Live Arcade, I would play that version.
Hmm. I obviously we now have the Sega Ages games on
Hmm.
the Switch, and some of the 3D classics moved over to the Sega Ages games. But I would argue that this is an essential collection if you get the physical version, for example, or the physical versions. But even if you get all the digital ones, the 3D effect on this, and I'm not a big 3D guy, but I think at first it was amazing. It was mind blowing that you could have the 3D effect on the 3DS without glasses and stuff.
Hmm.
But then I think it got old really fast. It was like just a gimmick.
Oh, definitely. My 3D slider was almost permanently on
Yeah,
the
yeah,
downward side. It was like Mario 3D Land, where like you had to have the 3D on to solve the puzzles. That was the only time that like I was like
yeah.
really using it.
Same, same. But I think this is a special case because you know most of these games, or you already knew most of these games, and it was a different way to experience them and see them from a different perspective. And you have like the arcade cabinets, and it was I think it's a nice addition, and it
Yeah,
showed.
I remember Outrun being really good
Yeah,
on that.
yeah. Some of these all included new modes like, for example, Fantasy Zone 2 Double, which was the W, but it was, you should read double for some reason, including included the Link Loop Land, I think, mode, which was like an endless mode where you
Okay.
collected money, and it's still one of my favorite ways to play this game. It's really addictive, and made me enjoy the Fantasy Zone series more than I ever did in the past. Uh, Outrun had at least two new songs, so there were additions, and this made people long. It was a longer overdue recognition, but made many people understand how talented M2 were as a developer, as developers, um, and the kings of ports.
Yeah,
But
and
not
Sega
just,
Ages was
but
so good.
yeah, 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 for sure. So, but I would advise people who have a 3DS to go back and try to grab the 3D classics, at least the physical versions, because you can't buy the digital ones
Yeah.
anymore. At least not legally buy, so you can't buy them. But if you have other ways, so moving over to the Switch, which is the current system. Um, what's your like? If you had to pick like
Oh man.
the Sega game on the Switch,
Well,
the
it's
one
tricky
that comes
because
straight to mind, to your
I mean
mind.
the one that immediately comes to mind is Banana Rumble, because that
Okay.
is a full exclusive as of now anyway. Bayonetta 3 is a big one, just because it was kind of the revitalization, even though
Hmm.
that came to no, that was Switch. Never mind.
Yeah,
I
it
was like,
was.
I was very confused because Bayonetta 2 was Wii U, and then Bayonetta 3
Yeah,
was Switch.
2022, I
Okay,
believe.
yeah, because we did a cover story on that. Yeah, I mean, it's got to be Banana Rumble, even though the one that I play the most is Sonic Origins Plus and
Hmm.
Sonic Mania. Those are the two that I play the most because they're just so easy to pick up and play, and just speed through whatever game I'm wanting to fire up at that point. Yeah, that's definitely the one I use the most is Sonic Origins Plus and Sonic Mania. But in terms of like, if we're going with a game that was exclusive that I also quite like, it is Banana Rumble, Super Monkey Ball Banana Rumble.
Yeah, definitely a good pick for a great Sega game on the Nintendo Switch. Yeah. Um, I was looking at the list here. Apart from the Sega Ages series, which we've, talking about the 3D classics, Sega Ages, in the same vein, probably the best versions of these classic games, with some that we hadn't seen before as well. And any of these is a great pick. So definitely recommended here. I didn't remember Sonic Mania off the top of my head. That didn't come to mind. So Sonic Mania, Sonic Mania Plus, right? Also came to this Streets of Rage 4.
Oh
Streets of Rage
yeah.
4.
Oh, can I
Probably
also
my most played. Yeah, sure.
say that I completely forgot the games that I wanted to come to Switch for the longest time and finally did? Persona 4 Golden and Persona 5 Royal.
Yeah.
Having those games on the go is a revelation, and it made it so that like so many of my favorite games of all time are available on Switch, because Breath of the Wild's my favorite game of all time. Ocarina of Time is number 2. That's on the Nintendo Switch Online catalog. Sonic 3 and Knuckles is available through Sonic Origins Plus. Um, Persona 5 Royal, we've talked about that. Final Fantasy 10 is on Switch, so it's just like, man, like so many of my favorite games. Why? And it's crazy because one of the ones that's not available on Switch is a Nintendo published game, and that's Pokemon Red and Blue. It's like, why is that not on Switch? We have Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, but those are just like weird, like Pokemon Go inspired remakes. And it's like,
Mhm.
why don't we have like the classic Pokemon games? So, sorry, just an interjection there that like
Yeah,
Persona
yeah.
5 and Persona 4 being on Switch is amazing. And Persona 3, I'm not a big fan of the portable version. I think Persona 3 Reload is the absolute best way to experience that game,
Mm.
but that's not on Switch.
Yeah, yeah. I remember people were for years people were clamoring for Persona 5 Royal or 5 to come to Switch. Uh, then they announced Joker for Smash Brothers Ultimate,
Hmm.
and that made it even worse. Because why don't we have the game on Switch?
We also got Arena Ultimax on Switch.
Yeah. Then you got Strikers, but not
Yeah.
5, right? So that people are really upset by that. So
It was
that
the
yeah,
weirdest
yeah.
thing having Strikers on Switch, but not on not Persona 5 Royal or Persona 5 Vanilla on
Yeah,
Switch.
yeah. I wonder why that happened. I wonder if there were some sort of like
There had to have
technical
been
complications or like license agreements or exclusivity agreements with
I think it was
PS5
exclusivity
or
because it seemed for the longest time that the mainline Persona games were all on PlayStation,
yeah.
and then the mainline SMT games were all on Nintendo.
Hmm.
And then any spin-offs of the Persona series seemed like they were able to go to whatever platform they wanted. Like
Yeah.
that's why we got like Persona Q, Persona
Q.
Q2
Yeah.
on 3DS. I
Hmm.
think that maybe they broke free from those shackles and now are able to publish these games because Persona 3 Reload didn't come to Switch, but it did come to Xbox on day one, and it's a part of Game Pass. Like if you have Game
Hmm.
Pass, you get the Persona 3 DLC when it comes out in a couple of weeks here. So it's like, man, like they really have like changed the way they're delivering these games.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's part of the reason why I experienced Persona 5 Royal was due to having Game Pass. Because I wouldn't be comfortable spending so much money on a game that I wasn't really sure I would enjoy.
Hmm.
Something that I is a genre that I'm not very familiar and comfortable with. So Game Pass was a huge part of why I experienced this game, and I'm thankful for it for
Yeah, and
sure.
I was the same way with Persona 5 Royal. I didn't, or it's Persona 5, the original Persona 5
Hmm.
back in 2017. I kind of bounced off Persona 4 Golden a little bit on Vita. I bought it because I had a Vita. I was kind of starving for a game, and everybody was like, "Oh my god, Persona 4 Golden is the greatest RPG of the past whatever years." And I'm like, "Okay, I'm in. Let me buy this. Let me fire it up." And then the intro is so slow, and I gave up about like 2 hours in, and I was like, I'm reading all this like lore and exposition. I don't even know if I'm going to like the gameplay of this. So I eventually just turned it off before I even got to like any kind of meaningful gameplay. Persona 5 does such a better job of like getting you into the action right off the bat.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I actually borrowed the Game Informer copy of Persona 5 when it first came out, was playing that, and then like somebody else was like, "Hey, do you mind if I grab that copy?" And I was like 50 hours deep, and I'm like, "Okay, it has more than earned my purchase at this point." So I went ahead and just bought a copy and then gave them the Game Informer copy.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. You reminded me of something when you talked about the Vita.
Mhm.
Something that also came to Switch. Puyo Puyo Tetris. Have
Yeah.
you? Yeah, I actually bought the Japanese version of Puyo Puyo Tetris on the Vita.
Oh,
Back in the
wow.
day, I imported that and I played it on my Vita and on my what was the PlayStation TV, right? The
Mhm.
little box that you had.
So,
Uh,
when I actually have a PlayStation TV solely because I didn't wanna play Persona 4 Gold. After I beat Persona 5, I didn't wanna play P4G on the Vita, so I bought a
okay,
PlayStation TV and migrated my file over there and started a new save file, and that's how I finally
you're
beat
really not
Persona
a
4 Gold.
handheld guy. Yeah.
No, I mean, I like it just fine. Like in a pinch, if I'm traveling and I'm on a flight, like I will play my Switch all the entire flight.
Mhm.
But if I have a choice of playing it up on like a 50 or 55-inch TV or playing it on like a 9-inch screen, like I'm going to
Yeah.
choose the huge 4K resolution screen all day every day.
Yeah. I'm actually I'm moving over to the handheld way of gaming more and more. As I get older, I get less time to game. I have less patience to wait. So just having like a Steam Deck or a Switch that I can just pick up and play and just put it to rest and then just pick up where I left off immediately. That actually makes a difference for me as
That
I
has
get
value for
older
sure.
and more boring as well. I'm getting older and more boring, so that's it. Yeah.
I'm sure you're a blast and a half.
So yeah, Puyo Puyo Tetris was something that finally came to the West, officially. Because I still have no clue what the Puyo Puyo Tetris story is. I'm kidding, but not really. Um, but when I played it in 2014 or 2015 on the Vita in Japanese, I really, really had no clue what was happening. There were some alien guys that played Tetris and some familiar Puyo characters that played Puyo. That's it. And that's about all that I know about the story still. Puyo Puyo Tetris 2 also came to the Switch,
Mhm.
and that's an improved version of it. Are you a big Puyo Puyo player?
Not really. I mean, I played Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, which was
Yep.
basically Puyo Puyo
Yeah.
reskinned for Dr. Robotnik. But yeah, I mean, I've tried Puyo Puyo like proper a few times, and I've kind of just like been like, okay, that's fun, but it's no Tetris.
I'm not smart enough for Puyo Puyo. I I've never been too shy to admit it. But I'm really big on Tetris, so yeah. And
I love Tetris.
one of my passions back in the day was to play when it came to Switch was to play online and just play Tetris versus the Puyo Puyo players, and it got very very intense. Like
Are you a Tetris 99 player?
yeah, yeah. Haven't played it in a while, but I'm a big fan of that. Tetris Effect as well. It's
Hmm.
a
Oh, I
great
love
version of
Tetris Effect.
Tetris.
Speaking of Mizuguchi, he was the
Yeah,
guy behind that.
yeah, yeah. It's like Raz or Luminous with Tetris. Genius, genius.
So good.
Yeah, so good. And that's one of those games that I have on several platforms.
Same. It's on
Yeah,
Switch, it's on PS5. I think
yeah,
it was on Game Pass or it is on Game Pass, so I had it on Xbox at least for whatever
yeah.
period it was there.
It's
Yeah,
on
and I have
my
the
wish
soundtrack
list,
too.
Steam wish list for whenever I think of getting it for the Steam Deck because I play a lot
Mhm,
on my Steam Deck these days, and that's got to be there as well.
that makes sense.
And the soundtrack is amazing. You have the soundtrack you were saying, right?
Yeah, I have Apple Music, so
Yeah,
I
same.
have that, and I have a playlist that is like the best video game vocal tracks. And it's like songs from Persona, it's song from Sonic, it's Tetris Effect, just all these different amazing vocal tracks that are on Apple Music, or I can add them because that's the one thing that keeps me from going to Spotify is the fact that you can add songs manually to your library rather than having to just make do with whatever is on the like official Spotify library. So it's like if there's a song that is not on Apple Music, I can just find it and put it in my iTunes library and sync it with the cloud, and it's suddenly I can put it in a playlist with the kind of official app. And I do that with like a lot of like live and acoustic recordings that I really like from like my bands that I like to listen to. But it also is really good for like video game music because a lot of those
Yeah.
soundtracks are not available officially on the streaming platforms. So being
Hmm.
able to add them manually is a huge boost for me, and that's why I do Apple Music over Spotify. And thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Yeah, I'm with you all the way. Yeah, yeah. Also, I'm too invested in the Apple ecosystem at this point.
I'll
So,
tell you what. I'll tell you what. I would go to Spotify in a heartbeat if they made an easy way to migrate all of my playlists over to Spotify and also gave me the option to upload custom songs the way Apple Music does.
I have a feeling that the migration part is easy enough. There's an app for that for sure.
I'm
I'm
sure
sure
there
there's an
is.
app for that. The other part is probably much trickier. Yeah, yeah.
And that's the
I
sticking point for me. If I really
yeah.
wanted to go to Spotify, because I love like I'm a stats nerd. So being able to like see like the Spotify Wrapped and everything, I
Hmm.
love that so much. And Apple, for how much I love Apple Music, it's so weak compared to it's a pale imitation. We'll use that phrase
Yeah,
to describe what Apple does with its end of year stats.
yeah.
It's
That's
like,
for
hey,
sure.
here's some artists that you enjoyed. Happy New
They
Year.
just do it because Spotify does it and people like to share it online. So, yeah. Who
They
knows?
need to up
Maybe
their game.
2024 is the year.
I've been saying that for 4 years now. It's never the year.
Yeah. So yeah, yeah. And we were talking about Switch, yeah. Okay. So um I think we also talked about the Switch Online,
Mhm.
which has it's like the virtual console of the future. For some, not as great, but as you said before, and I'm with you on that. It's nice to have like it's part of your subscription. You have all these games available. They've been adding more, so why
Mhm.
not? Why not?
Yeah.
Just you can try these games on your Switch easily, easily. So yeah, so this is basically just a very brief overview of Sega games that we played on Nintendo systems, and Sega have been very prolific in developing games and publishing games on Nintendo platforms. Uh, Sonic probably the big one throughout the years with several exclusive titles like the Storybook series, the adventure games for a long time were exclusive to GameCube, uh, Sonic Lost World, the amazingness of Sonic Boom. Um, I mean, so many. But Sonic probably I think still sells best on Nintendo platforms. So statistically, it was a worthwhile investment on Sega's part to go all in on the Nintendo platforms.
Although I
Ah,
will say that in talking to Ivo Gerskovich, he lamented that deal. He was like, they were
mm,
fantastic partners and we love Nintendo. We love putting our stuff on Nintendo, but we didn't want to limit ourselves anymore and be exclusive to one platform in that way. And we needed, if we wanted to devote the kind of resources that we wanted to, we needed to take our games multi-platform again, and like all of our games multi-platform, not just like Sonic Unleashed came out around the same time that Sonic Colors did and Sonic
mhm.
Generations. And, Sonic Colors was the only one of those that was exclusive, but they signed a deal with Nintendo to have a set number of games be
Yeah.
exclusive. That's how we got Sonic Lost World and Sonic Boom as
Mhm.
well. And it's like if we were gonna really go all in. We wanted to go all in with the widest player base possible.
Yeah, yeah. And as you mentioned before, with the Persona games as well, and current Sonic games, and most games, in general, apart from like specific ones like Super Monkey Ball, maybe Samba de Amigo, which also came to the Switch. But apart from that, most games, Sonic Superstar, Sonic Origins, they're all multi-platform. So, and
Mhm.
that's their current model, business model, and it will continue with Sonic X Shadow Generations,
My
stuff
big
like that.
hope is that when the Switch 2 comes out, or whatever it ends up being called, it is powerful enough that these don't feel like extremely compromised versions. Like Sonic Frontiers, it runs on Switch and it runs okay, but it's definitely like if you're going to play that game, you should play it on PlayStation 5 or Xbox Series X or
Mm.
PC. Same, I would imagine, will be the case for Sonic X Shadow Generations. I bet it runs fine, but it's like you're probably going to get the best experience on a PS5 or Xbox or PC if you have a good PC. I'm hopeful that when Switch 2 comes out, that will no longer be the case, at least in the near term.
Do you think we'll get, like, first of all, uh, the games will be backwards compatible, or the system
I
will be backwards compatible?
It has to be.
It
Like that
has to
is the
be,
number
right?
one thing. Like if they said it's not backwards compatible, I would be immediately soured towards that platform.
Yeah,
I feel like that's the standard nowadays. Like it
yeah,
used for a while, it wasn't the standard. Then it was the standard, like hardcore, and then it wasn't the standard again. And then Xbox really changed the game, having the universal Windows platform being applied to Xbox One and then carried into Xbox Series X, and that forced PlayStation to do it. And then like the Switch, I think, is going to have to be. And the reason that it wasn't because the Wii played GameCube games, and then the Wii U played Wii games, so it makes sense that they were able to do that and carry on that lineage. And then when the Switch came out, it was a completely different media, right? It was no longer the discs that the Wii U and the Wii used, so
yeah.
they couldn't be backwards compatible. But now, like with such an emphasis on digital, I can't help but think that any platform that comes out without backwards compatibility, especially one as successful as the Switch, would just immediately irritate its player base and would discourage people actively from upgrading to the next generation.
And it wouldn't make any sense either, right? Because they already told us that it's gonna be, they didn't say iteration,
They
but
said
like a next generation of Switch, right?
Yeah,
Or
they called it
something like
Switch
that.
Next model. It
Yeah,
said Switch Next model is the right way to think of this system.
yeah. So
So
it
it would be wild if it was actually called Switch 2 or something and did not play Switch 1 games. I
for
feel like
sure.
that would turn so many people off.
And somehow upscale them, or, uh, you know,
You'd hope.
that's the hope. I think backwards compatibility is realistic. The other part, we don't know
But look
what
at
it
what
will do to older games.
look at what Xbox was able to do with Sonic Generations and Sonic Unleashed. Like if you have the Xbox 360 versions of those games, Sonic Generations and Sonic Unleashed, two of the most beloved Sonic games from the early 2010s, and you play it on your Xbox Series X, it looks like a game that came out like maybe in 2020.
Yeah,
And these are
sure,
Xbox these are 10-year-old games at that point, right? Like
sure.
Sonic Generations came out in 2011 and Sonic Unleashed came out in 2010. They made those games run buttery smooth, and they made it so it was 60 frames per second and just fantastic resolution. And it's such a revelation, and it's such like a I hope this is the standard going forward for
Yeah,
backward compatibility. And the same thing happened when I played Ghost of Tsushima. When I upgraded from the PS4 to the PS5 and I just fired up the same game, Ghost of Tsushima, on PS5, it ran so much smoother. And it's like, this is how backwards compatibility should run.
yeah,
This is how it should play. You're getting rid of load times because now you're operating on SSDs and processors that capitalize on that. And I mean, I'm predicting that the Switch 2 is going to have an NVMe SSD because in the time since Switch 1 came out, the solid state drives have shrunk so dramatically that it is like it could easily fit in. I mean, look at the Steam Deck. It's a
yeah,
larger form factor,
yeah, for
but
sure.
it does have an SSD in it, and it's
It's
amazing because
very,
of it.
very small. Yeah. Yeah. So
And like,
it
yeah,
would make sense.
so hopefully that is the way that Nintendo approaches backward compatibility. And these games that maybe don't run super well or have like crazy bad pop in, like Sonic Frontiers,
Hmm.
maybe they will get some sort of boost, or maybe even just enable the developer to bring it up to be on par with what we have with the Xbox Series X and PS5, or even the PS4 and Xbox One versions of those games, because even some of those games, they run better on the hardware that came out before the Switch came out,
Hmm.
because
Yeah.
they
Yeah. For
just,
sure.
they're powerhouses.
Yeah. My only concern here is Nintendo is Nintendo. They do their own thing. So
Every
would
time.
they consider, yeah, we don't really want to do that. It's like
Well,
too much hassle.
the report out of Gamescom 2023, which is, timely because we're in Gamescom 2024 as we're recording this. The report out of Gamescom 2023, when all those initial leaks were coming out that they were showing the Switch 2 to developers behind closed doors, was that the demo that they were showing was Breath of the Wild running at 60 frames per second and increased resolution. So hopefully that is them saying, "Hey, look, this is an old game and we can get
Hmm.
it to run so much better." I hope that is indicating that they are planning on doing some sort of thing. But it also might just be a tech demo of them saying,
Yeah.
"Hey, and love this game. You've played it. You've seen how it looks on the current Switch. Here's what it'll look like if we were to remake it for." It might not even be a game that ever comes to market for Switch 2, but
Yeah.
that gave me hope that they would be taking that approach with backwards
Hmm.
compatibility for Switch 2.
We can hope, and it's not too long. We don't have to wait too long to really know what's going to happen on that front.
No.
But hopefully, yeah, and some of the games that you mentioned would benefit greatly from that approach. So hopefully they will be sensible about the whole thing. Just get on with times, I think.
They're usually behind the curve with the times, but right now they are the
Yeah.
trendsetters. Like, they are the ones that are really making it, like, making these console makers and even Valve take a
Hmm.
real hard look at making a handheld device,
Yeah.
because it seemed like everybody abandoned handhelds except for Nintendo. And then when they announced that the Switch was a hybrid console, they were the only handheld device that was like currently kicking, right? Like the
Hmm.
only mainstream handheld device anyway. And then now we have the PlayStation Portal. There's rumors that Xbox is investigating doing some sort of like Switch like peripheral for Xbox. Um, Obviously, the Steam Deck. We have a bunch of other PC based
Uh-huh.
uh, handheld devices, the ROG Ally, um, the all kinds of great stuff that has come out of the Switch's success. So it is. Nintendo does tend to operate behind the times, particularly when it comes to like adopting new technologies. Like, look at their approach to online. Like, that was almost generations behind what Xbox was doing. And but when you look at what they did with Switch, that was the trendsetter right there.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. For once, not for once. Going back, that happened before, but like in
I mean,
recent
they were
years,
motion controls.
yeah. Yeah. For sure. Yeah.
I mean,
But
both Xbox and PlayStation, after the success of the
they
Wii,
tried.
they tried. They
They
didn't.
tried.
They didn't succeed, but they tried.
Awesome. Okay, so Brian, we're running a little bit over the time that we wanted to like this podcast to last, but
Tends to happen with me.
I'm really enjoying the conversation, and really we really have to get you back on the show to talk a little bit more about Persona and other stuff. But we before we recorded, we talked about like sharing like a sort of a top something of games of Sega games on Nintendo systems. We abandoned the concept of a top, but gun to your head, if you had to pick like one or two games that you would say are you know amazing games that you have memories of, or either for being great games or because you had a great time playing them, you have like great memories, a great experience, nostalgia, whatever. What would you pick as like the two definitive Sega games on Nintendo systems?
A very strange request from this gunman in question.
Yeah.
Like, I
It's a
can't imagine a
very,
scenario where
very
he would
weird criminal.
have a gun to the back of my head and say,
Yeah.
name 2 great Sega games on Nintendo platforms, but
It's probably a banana. Yeah.
Um, so, I mean, it's gotta be Sonic Adventure 2 Battle, just because that was, like, the mind-blowing thing of seeing Sonic over on a Nintendo console and just being like, "Oh my god, like, this is real. This is happening." Like, pinching myself, being like, "Is Sonic really coming to a Nintendo console?" And not to mention it's a fantastic game. So I'll do that for nostalgia, plus the fact that I love Sonic Adventure 2. Man, um you know what? I'm gonna cheat a little bit here and go Persona 5 Royal on Switch because it is such a perfect fit for the Switch. But then if you want to go that route, then it's like, well, what about Sonic Origins Plus? Because it's so cool to have those games all on the go and have them be like pretty much uncompromised versions, aside from the aforementioned missing songs on Sonic 3.
Mhm.
Um, Yeah, I mean, I'll do that. I'll do Sonic Adventure 2 Battle, and then because of the novelty and it's just being an awesome game to begin with, and then I'll do Persona 5 Royal because for the longest time that was the dream to have a portable version of that game, and now we finally do. But honorable mentions to Sonic Origins Plus and Sonic Mania Plus.
Okay. Okay. Good picks. Good picks. Yeah. I can get
Maybe I'm
behind
forgetting
those.
something. There's got to be
Yeah.
some that I'm forgetting.
Yeah.
But what about you?
I would say Sonic Advance for sure, hands down. Sonic Advance was the first Sonic game that I played on a Nintendo platform, and the first one that came out on a Nintendo platform.
Actually,
So
you're jogging my memory a little bit here, and it's one we didn't mention when we were talking about the Game Boy Advance titles. But I put a ton of time into Sonic Battle.
yeah, I briefly mentioned it, but I think
Maybe just
I
in the
just
rapid
said the
fire,
name
yeah.
and we didn't. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Must have gone in one ear out the other with that.
yeah.
But yeah, I love. We didn't dissect it per
We didn't,
se,
we didn't, we didn't.
but
But
yeah, I love
that's a good
Sonic Battle.
shout. Yeah. What was it about it that you enjoyed back in the day?
I think it was kind of like that Super Smash Brothers style novelty of like just like an arena brawler, but it had that isometric view. It had a fun like RPG style element to it where you could customize Emerald, the
Yeah.
robot, and you could have him fight alongside you with like the custom move set that you give him. And I don't know, I just had a fun time with the story because it was a lot of the characters from the Sonic Adventure series. So I was like, it's kind of like that Persona 5 Strikers thing where it's like, okay, this isn't my favorite gameplay, but I like spending time with these characters. And it was like just after the Sonic Adventure series. So like I think Chaos was even mentioned in it and appeared in it
It
as a
appeared. Yeah,
character.
yeah, 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 yeah.
And Shadow's there and
Hmm.
Rouge the Bat.
Rouge. Yeah.
Yeah. So like there was all the Sonic Adventure characters that I had like grown to love, and it was like just a fun kind of mindless brawler, even though it was sometimes a little bit cheap in the way that like the gameplay played out. But yeah, that deserves an honorable mention that we didn't give enough time to it
For sure.
in terms of like giving it its shine.
Yeah, I mentioned this when I talked about my Sega story with handhelds, but I actually have a fun experience with Sonic Battle. I purchased the game, and I do have a very vivid memory of a train ride that I had. I had to take to visit a relative up north. It was like a 3 or 4 hour ride, and I played the entire time I was playing that game, and I have a very fond feeling and memory of playing that game on that ride, and I will forever think about that. Going through coastal Portugal, looking at the view, and sometimes and mostly looking at my Game Boy Advance and playing Sonic Battle. So yeah, very fond of that game as well. And another one, I don't think it's on the Switch Online service yet. I'm not sure, but I can
Oh
check.
no, it's Sonic
It's
Battle
not,
is
right?
not.
No, it's not. It's not. So
So you said Sonic
um,
Advance for your first one. What was your second one?
my second one, I think I'm going to cheat as well, and I'm going to say the Sega Ages collection of games on the
Oh, the entire
Switch.
collection.
The
Okay.
entire collection, I think so. Because if I have to pick one, I'll probably merge it with the 3D classics, and I'll go. Oh my god. I'll probably go Fantasy Zone with this, I think. Cuz although although I think 3D Fantasy Zone 2 is my favorite out of all of these. But yeah, Sega Ages slash 3D Classics collection as a whole, the whole experience, but with a very special mention of 3D Fantasy Zone Double on the 3DS. These are games that actually are very dear to me. I could go with other Sonic games. Like you, I'm a big Sonic fan, but I don't want to. Why does Sonic always hog the limelight? No, no. Let us talk about other Sega games. So yeah,
Sure.
let's go with those. But for sure, many good times spent playing games on Nintendo platforms, which is something that, looking back, if you were to tell, like 10-year-old me that I would enjoy playing Nintendo consoles or games on Nintendo consoles, I would be, what? No, there's no Nintendo. It was I actually grew up in a different setting than yours, because Nintendo at some point wasn't really that important here and relevant
Mm.
in Portugal. Sega was everywhere. Sonic was everywhere. Mario not so much.
Wow.
So yeah, I the first experience I had with an NES, air quotes here, was one of my friends' like Famiclone systems that were very easily available over here. And there were a lot of like 50 games in one cartridges that people could buy. And he had
Oh,
one
wow.
of those. And I think the first game we ever played together was, I think the first game that I ever played on a Nintendo system was Contra.
Oh,
And
wow.
we
That's one of the
played,
first ones I played too.
yeah. And I have very fond memories of playing Contra with him. But I remember I already had a Mega Drive at the time, and I thought, the Mega Drive's much better. Sonic's much better than this. But and I do enjoy myself some Super Mario Brothers too. That's
The
another one.
US version or the Japanese
The
version?
US version, not the Lost
Okay.
Levels. Yeah,
Yeah, nobody likes the Lost Levels.
yeah, nobody likes that. It was I think it was the first Mario game that I played. I knew about Mario 1, but Mario 2 was the first one that I played. And I to this day sometimes go back and play Mario Brothers 2. Yeah. Yoshi's Island is another one that I like. Um, but yeah. But this
Yeah.
is a Sega podcast. So okay, I have one final question for you, Brian, because we really need to wrap things up. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
And I will refer people to the at the time of recording the latest episode of All Things Nintendo. You had Blake J. Harris on the show, author of Console Wars book. You talked about the anniversary of the Genesis in the US as well.
Mhm.
And one of the things that you guys mentioned that I was actually planning before I listened to the episode, I was planning on asking you some way was, do you think the rivalry between Sega and Nintendo uh, made them both better? And specifically, because you're a Nintendo guy, it's on your podcast, did it make Nintendo better? And looking back now at this new kind of relationship, uh, did it work in Nintendo's favor, the kind of games that Sega brought to the systems and the relationship they're having these days? It's a long
I think
question, but
the it's fine. I think I got all the parts. In, the '90s, I think they absolutely Sega pushed Nintendo to become better. Like, they took them to kind of the brink of popularity, right? Like, the Sega's big push to overtake Mario and overtake the kingdom of Nintendo that nobody else could dare challenge. They were the ones that came the closest, and it really forced Nintendo to evolve and push further than I think they would have without competition. And that's why competition is so important, because it brings out the best in everyone. And Nintendo had never seen anything like what Sega brought to the table, with them going straight at Nintendo, and Nintendo tried to be a little bit monopolistic with their practices, but ultimately what ended up securing it was not calling retailers and saying like, "Hey, we need you to not have shelf space for Sega or buying up all the memory chips or anything. It was just putting out better games. Eventually, like, I love my Genesis, but the Super Nintendo eventually started pulling away because games like Donkey Kong Country and Mario Kart and everything, and Sega just had no answer for that. It had the answer to Mario. It had Sonic to take on Mario, but like eventually like there was nothing that really compared to those later Super Nintendo games. Then obviously once the Nintendo 64 launched, it completely left Sega in the dust because the Saturn just didn't compare to what Nintendo was doing with the N64, and they didn't even get a Sonic game on the N64, or
On the
of course they didn't
Saturn,
get
yeah.
on the Saturn. So the N64 was able to really pull away because we didn't get another true Sonic game until the Dreamcast, and then by then, like Nintendo was a completely different company than the one that Sega was beefing with in the 90s.
Mhm.
However, I do think they also have extremely benefited from having this mutual relationship because people our age and maybe a little bit younger remember Sega and Nintendo being these great rivals in the 90s, and having these two mascots able to finally exist on the same platform is such a benefit to Nintendo, but also to Sega because like I say this every time like a new Metroidvania or a new 2D platformer is announced from an indie developer and it looks really promising and it's only announced for PC. I'm always like, oh, that'll come to Switch eventually because it's too perfect of a fit for the audience that is normally attracted to the Switch. And I think you could say that a lot for many of Sega's games. Like maybe not like the Like a Dragon or slash Yakuza series. Like I think those are perfect for PlayStation and Xbox.
Yeah.
However, Sonic, Super Monkey Ball, Persona, they're all amazing fits on the Switch and for that audience. So it would feel really wrong, I think, that if like Sonic games just stopped coming to Switch altogether, it would be like, man, that just something about that doesn't feel right. Kind of in the way that, like initially having Sonic Adventure 2 Battle on the GameCube just didn't feel right at first. So I think that yes, Nintendo has greatly benefited from it. Although I'm sure they would be fine, especially this generation, if they didn't happen to have any Sonic games.
Yeah, yeah. The Switch is doing fine. But yeah, but I
Yeah.
do agree that this is a mutual beneficial relationship at this point. Yeah, for sure. Um you I was listening to you list some of the games that are a perfect fit for the Switch, some of the Sega games, and I was thinking I have an opinion that I don't think many people share, or at least they're not so vocal about it. But I do believe that what Nintendo are doing right now with their games, the kind of games they release, and the kind of stance they have on the like whole gaming as a whole is a little bit like what Sega did back in the day. So if you want to get that feeling of like wonder and amazement and like the blue skies that I usually talk about that Sega represented back in the day, the closest thing you can get is some of the Nintendo games that the company's being being putting out these past years. Um, I do love me some Zelda, some Mario as well,
And
and other. Yeah, sure.
just
Go ahead.
to hammer home that Nintendo would still be very okay if Sega suddenly stopped publishing on its platform. I'm looking at the list of the best-selling Switch games of all time. The only ones published or developed by Sega at number 83, Shin Megami Tensei 5, and at number 86, Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games Tokyo 2020.
Oh, that's
So,
quite surprising. No Sonic,
yeah,
no lock proper mainline Sonic games there. Whoa.
I mean that also might not include digital sales, which is where I would say the
Yeah.
majority of Sonic Mania and Sonic Origins sales were. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean that's surprising.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, and it's worked out okay for Sega as well, going multi-platform. So
Oh yeah,
no,
it's gotten
no
them a huge
worries, no
audience.
worries. Yeah. Brian, thank you very much for coming on the show. it's been an honor and a privilege to have like a proper professional on this show. And
Don't give me
people
too
should,
much credit.
yeah, people should definitely check out All Things Nintendo. So where can people find you,
Sure,
Brian?
yeah. So All Things Nintendo is available on all the big podcast platforms. I also have a Patreon page where you can subscribe for $5 or $10. The perks include early and ad-free episodes, um, access to a community Discord that, as I mentioned at the top of the show, a fantastic group of folks there, as well as at the $10 level, you get an entirely second podcast. So an entirely additional podcast every week called All Things Gamers. It is a multi-platform podcast exclusive for the $10 patrons of the show. I'm also on YouTube. You can just search at Brian P. Shea. That's SHEA. And then same handle across Twitter, Threads, and Instagram at Brian P. Shea.
Excellent. And you can find all the links in the show notes as well. So do check those out and definitely listen to All Things Nintendo. Recommended. It gets the Sega Lounge seal of approval.
Oh, thank you so much. That means a lot.
Oh yeah, thank you very much for the content. All the best for your future endeavors, whatever they may be.
We'll see what happens.
Yeah, and hopefully you can come back to the show soon to talk about Persona. Yeah,
Persona and Shenmue.
Oh, don't get me started on that. You don't have enough time for that. Yeah, as for ourselves, like the Sega Lounge, we're still here after 10 years, and so if you want to support the show, by the way, remember you can go to the SegaLounge.com. We have the support button over there. Just check out. You can check out our wonderful merch, right? Like the beautiful 10th anniversary. The picture doesn't give this credit, but the beautiful 10th anniversary merch. We also have been moving a little bit over to YouTube. So subscribe to our channel as well. We're releasing like not really the whole video versions of podcasts yet, but some clips. Maybe this is the first one that we're going to release the full version. I don't know. It depends. Take a look at our channel and you'll see. But thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Brian, again, thank you very much for joining me. It's been a blast. Hope everyone enjoyed this longer than usual podcast, but I think people will agree that the conversation was really nice. So I don't think people will mind.
Well, I hope. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for coming, and we'll see everyone next time. Bye-bye. The Sega Lounge, hosted by me, KC, and part of Radio Sega's network of live shows and podcasts. Theme song and incidental music by OSC. Got any suggestions? Drop me an email to podcast@thesegalounge.com. Find us at The Sega Lounge on X, Twitter, and Instagram, at thesegalounge.com on Blue Sky, and be sure to check out our Twitch and YouTube channel for live video content. You can find previous episodes of the show by going to thesegalounge.com, on the Terra Player app, and wherever you listen to podcasts. A Mixed On Productions podcast.